Blog Talk Radio.
Bichamo Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, Neye Ojirada, Medinde Ojirapo, Kwesi Ra Nehempata Akan. Akwamumai Maruka Etipi Mu Ojirapo, that means greetings to all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people, meaning Africans, black people. Today is Ojira Day. My name is Ojirapo, Kwesi Ra Nehempata Akan, Ojirapo of the Akwamu Nation in North America. Yet I'll say we thank you for tuning in once again. We're going to be placing some links in the chat room. The chat room is open. We just want to send out one more message right quick. But you can go to the Nhoma page. That's one of the links that we'll be putting forward. Be downloading some of the books from that specific page. We're going to get into this information. If you are in the chat room and you want to interact in the chat room, you must log in with a username. If you don't have a username, you can create one very quickly in Blog Talk. If you're on the phone, you have a question or a comment, just hit the number 1, and then we can see that your hand is raised and we can connect. Okay, so the first link we're going to put up in the chat room. The first link is to the Nhoma page, which is our publications page. And we're going to put up a few other links as well. We're going to put up the link, and all of these books, by the way, are on the Nhoma page as well. Put the link up to the publication, our book, Ankh, The Origin of the Term Yoga. I'm going to put that up. Also the link to Madanechi, Divine Law and Divine Hate. Put that one up, and then we will also going to check out the book Kokobo, Warning: Sexuality, Homosexuality was not accepted in ancient Kemet. We're going to put the link for that up because we're going to have some portions from there that we will be checking out. So all of these links, and all of these are the PDF versions of these books on our website. And for the new people who came in, if you're on the phone line, you have a question or comment, just hit the number 1. If you are in the chat room, you have to create a username if you don't already have one. You can be a guest in the chat room and listen, but if you don't have a username, you will not be able to interact in the chat room. So we just had a couple of messages we wanted to make sure we got out as people are filling up the phone lines right now. If you had a question from a previous broadcast, you can ask those questions as well. We have shows on 3 days a week: Joda, Benada, and Awukuda. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We have Akanfo Nanason, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion on Monday nights. And hold on one second. Let me make sure we got this right. Okay. Okay, so we have Akanfo Nanasom, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion on Monday nights. Tuesday nights, of course, tonight, Ojira, which we're going to get into. Wednesday nights, we have EGUA, Marketplace Day, where we, deal with a specific business, organization, product or service in the Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut community. We often have people come on, talk about their products and services that benefit the Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut community, the African community, but also share our ancestral values at the same time. So those are the 3 shows weekly. All of the 76 broadcast archives, we have all of those on the channel, so you can go to the channel You can go, there's over, most of them range between 2 and 3 hours, probably on average about 2 hours and 20 minutes. You can go to all of those archives, get that information. You can also go to our YouTube page, ODWIRA on YouTube. We have a number of videos, about 60 plus videos out there. Of course, you can go, we're ODWIRA on Twitter. We are Afuraitkaitnut on Facebook. We also have our own network. And let's put the information for the network out there for individuals who are not aware. The Afuraitkaitnut Ntontai, which is an Afurakanu Ancestral Religion Network. Social media is our own private social media network that we pay for. Of course, people may have noticed that Facebook is beginning to not only force people to change their name and send in IDs to make sure that's the person's name. Of course, they're doing it for a number of people, but of course they target any name that sounds Afrocentric, African-centered, cultural, and so forth, revolutionary, whatever they think it may be. They will target those kinds of names heavily. They're having people change their names, but they're also shutting down groups, shutting down Facebook groups. If they're an Afrocentric, African-centered cultural group dealing with ancestral culture, religion, something dealing with revolution, liberation, things like that, they're shutting the groups down. And they'll give an excuse saying there was offensive language or you were speaking against homosexuals or other races and things like that. So when you tell the truth about the whites and their offspring, you tell the truth about dissexuality, homosexuality, its perversity in nature, then the whites and their offspring will shut these groups down. And then people try to get back on, and then they have to monitor their language or else they're going to be shut down again. So while you can use Facebook as like a bulletin board or a place to give announcements, it's best for us to also have our own separate network, our own separate form of social media so we can exchange information without being censored by our enemies. So our Afuraitkaitnut.ning.com, that's our network that we established for that purpose. It's a few years old. We have hundreds of people on the network studying the same information, people here in this country, people around the world, our people, of course, only, exchanging information, posting blogs, posting videos, posting discussions, helpful information, exchanging ideas, and connecting with other individuals who they may not have known were in their area. You'll find that you think you may be the only person or a few of you are the only people in your area studying some real information. Then you get on a network like that and find out that a few blocks away, somebody is actually, in your same area. And they didn't know you were there, you didn't know they were there. And, the only access you had to people dealing with real information up to that point was online. But then you can connect. So people network in that fashion, as well as hosting their events, hosting their businesses. We have a section for not only ancestral religion, culture, nation building, news in the community, but also a section for Afuraitkaitnut businesses, the EGUA marketplace section where people post information about their businesses so we can get our people to access products and services. Whatever we need, we should be able to look somewhere in the community and be able to access those products and or services in some fashion. So you can join that, set up a profile, and, we'll approve you and so forth. And you yourself, if you'd like to start a network, you can look at different platforms. We're using the Ning platform. It is a monthly fee. They have different, pay schedules. They have different packages. Some are more expensive than others. But, if you're gonna have a network, you're gonna have to pay something. Same thing and we do encourage people to establish different forms of social media. Establish your own network so you can get this kind of information out. We need many, many networks. The same is true, for example, with Blog Talk Radio. We encourage people you get some good information, or if you find some good information that's relevant, that's accurate, you can start a Blog Talk Radio show and just discuss that information, or have that discussion with the audience. Just have an interactive, show. Bring up the kind of information that you want to focus on. We need to have thousands of shows talking about real information. We already have thousands of shows that talk about nonsense. We have thousands of shows talking about Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hebrewism, 5%ism, and Nubianism, and all kinds of nonsense, Moorishism, all of that garbage. So we need more shows, many, many shows, dealing with real information, headed up by males as well as females, males and females doing radio shows, internet television shows, publishing, whether it's articles, books, blogs, releasing videos, whether they're short, long, whatever. We need males and females promoting accurate information so we can destroy this nonsense. Just like with the name platform, you have to pay for that, and we do pay for that. Same thing is true with Blog Talk Radio. If you're going to have a show in prime time, you do have to pay. If you want to have a show that's, outside of prime time hours, then you don't have to pay, but it's limited during the day, basically, when many people can't listen, but then you're also limited to like a half an hour or something. So they force you really to, if you want to have a show that's beyond a half an hour, they force you to pay. But we do have to pay in order to get this information out. So we do encourage that. Also, when you look on we posted the links in the chat room for some of the publications we'll be touching on. On my page, for some of the new individuals, we do have 15 books that we have published. The ebook versions of all of our books are free downloads, so we've made all of them available for free. But the softcover versions we do sell, we do publish them, we print them in-house on our own printers in color. We do sell them. They range between $8 and $11. About 8 of them are $9, about 5 of them are $10, one is $11, one is $8. So we have a number of different books dealing with various aspects of cosmology, trustery, Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut culture, religion, nation building, natural health, a number of different things, philosophy, culture, behavioral health, a number of different things. So you can check out those various works. If you like to make a purchase, any purchase of 10 books or more, like sometimes people will purchase a 10-book set, 11-book set, or the whole 15-book set, is automatically 30% off for 10 books or more. So, for example, the entire 15-book set, when you purchase the whole thing with 30% off, it's only $99 for the whole 15-book set. So, of course, that's less than $10 per book. And it's actually accurate information. There's a great deal of information out here about metaphysics and spirituality and culture that's misinforming our people. And, of course, most of these authors do not charge less than $10 per book that they publish. So they're charging much more, and much of the information is either a mixture of accurate and false information or just generally misinformation coming from the white offspring that has been blackened up into a pseudo-spirituality. So, but 30% off for any order of 10 books or more, but of course, 1 book, 2 books, whatever it is, anything is helpful. Your purchases assist us in 2 ways. Number 1, of course, it gets the information out. When people get that information, they, derive a tangible benefit. People have stopped smoking because they study our information on substance abuse abstinence, the negative effects of marijuana on melanin, for example, and other drugs on melanin, as well as on our sum, our spirit, making us more open to discarnate entities and so forth, and negative behaviors. We have had people stop. And, of course, we also have our Akuma substance abuse abstinence ritual method, where we show individuals ritually how they can overcome substance abuses, the addiction to, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. So even in our text, when we talk about melanin and marijuana, or melanin and other drugs and so forth, we've had many people stop smoking just from one read of our article, having smoked for years. That saves them money. It also benefits their health and begins to help them repair relationships with individuals who were away from them because they were engaged in some form of addiction. The same thing is true of spiritual work, ritual practices, things that people can incorporate into their lives. So that person, as soon as they purchase the books, it also assists us to continue to give away all of our books in the ebook version for free. We also, when we do presentations in different cities, we do not charge a speaker's fee, and we do not charge an admissions fee when people come to hear our presentation. That's one of our stipulations. We do not force people to pay to come listen to what we have to say. In addition to that, over the past year, whenever we've done a presentation, whether it was in Philly or Connecticut or Baltimore or Virginia or wherever we've gone, a number of different places, Tennessee or Texas, wherever we've taught, every individual who came to the event, we were able to give away a free copy of one of our softcover publications. So we always endeavor to do that whenever we have an event. In addition to that, we don't charge. So when people come to our events, number one, they don't have to pay. Number two, they walk away with one of our softcover books, even if they don't have the ability to pay. Many of our people are not working. Many of our people are working, but they don't have additional income. Some people have some additional income. They end up spending it on things that, turns out to be self-destructive, like whether it's drug use or even some of the foods that we buy, going to McDonald's and different things like that are contributing to our ill health. So they still don't have funds, even though they have funds, but they don't. And the only reason they don't is because they've been conditioned to misuse their funds on things that are actually self-destructive and placed in our community by the whites and their offspring to destroy our bodies. So, but once they learn something, they'll stop engaging in self-destructive activity. They'll save that money, and they can move forward. But the reality is when we go out, sometimes people do not have funds, and we don't want them to walk away with nothing and just come to some presentation, even though it's good information. But it's not about emotionalism and charging people up and getting them pumped up. We want to give people information that they can tangibly derive a benefit from immediately and perpetually. So when you purchase books, that assists us to continue the free program, continue to publish. We have a number of books coming out that we haven't published yet, that we are working on, that we just haven't had the time or the funds yet to get going. But we have a number of books that we haven't even begun. We have 15 books, but we have many more publications that we haven't even had a chance to sit down and write. So they're just in the head right now. We have the information. We just have to have the time to write and the funds to produce. But we have much more coming. So that assists us in getting that process going. Also, any purchase also assists our institution. All the books that we publish, broadcast, everything that we learn, that we teach, is born out of Akungwasuya, which is the name of our institution. We're working to establish a physical, permanent space for our institution so that we can expand our services to the community, meaning we'll have classes in the space, and we'll have numerous classes, not just the broadcast on a weekly basis, which we will continue, but we'll have classes for people to be able to come to physically as well as via live streaming throughout the week. We'll also have ritual practices, observances at the center. We will also have conferences at the center where people can come from out of state to attend our conferences on ancestral religion and culture and so forth. We will also have our publishing arm in the center as opposed to in our place of residence. So therefore, we will be able to expand the publishing, including employment opportunities for those who would like to, who need some employment. In addition to that, we have the entrepreneurship piece already. So if any one of you who would like to become Nokwade-fo, distributors of our work, you simply purchase the books wholesale, which is 30% off, and then you sell them retail to friends, family, coworkers, and so forth. All of that is on the Nhoma page, the Nhoma link on the website, all that information. So we just wanted to get that out for some of the new individuals who are not aware of the work that we're doing. So let's get into this information. So we started last week when we dealt with the real New Year, the Zodiac, and we began to talk about this notion of pseudo-Kemeticism. So you have individuals in two camps, some who are deliberately misinforming our people with regard to the culture of ancient Kemet, and then you have individuals who are unwittingly misinforming our people because they've been misinformed themselves. The larger group is the people who are doing so unwittingly because they've been misinformed themselves. So they began to incorporate all of these nonsensical ideas, white culture, pseudo-religious practices, pseudo-philosophies of the whites and their offspring, and tried to incorporate them into ancestral culture or quote-unquote ancient sciences and things like that and promote them as this is what our ancestresses and ancestors were doing, which is inaccurate. So we touched on, in part one last week, and of course the archive is there, we touched on monotheism, which is nonsense. The whites and their offspring would try to promote the idea that Akhenaten was the father of monotheism and promoted monotheism, which is 100% inaccurate. And they derive that all from mistranslations, misinterpretations of the great hymns to the Aten, and there are only a few copies of the great hymns to the Aten, but when you read them, of course, Akhenaten does not only talk about the Aten, he also talks about Kepra, he also talks about Hapi, he also talks about Shu, he talks about different Aboson, different divinities, and does not deny their existence or their functioning in creation. It is the whites and their offspring who would like to promote that idea because that foolish idea is a political ploy to get our people, number one, to reject the actual forces in nature, animate the sun, moon, stars, black substance of space, the earth mother, and animate us. We are connected to. They want us to reject them, reject their guidance, and therefore all we will have left to pay attention to is the enemy, the whites and their offspring. And then they give us a fake God, whether it's a fake little white God or an invisible fake entity, give it a little fake name like Allah or Yahweh, Brahman, and so forth, Jesus and all these other characters, and Buddha, and then make us follow this fictional cartoon character while they are the representatives. And of course, they teach through this fictional character that we should never harm them who have invaded and enslaved our people. We should just turn the other cheek or, wait for the cycle of reincarnation to be, distinguished or extinguished through our, following the right path and all this nonsense. That's all political. In reality, when you actually can attune to the Supreme Being, which all Afuraitkaitnut people can do, and the whites and their offspring cannot, they can attune to Amen and Amenet, Nyame and Nyamewa. They don't have that capacity. They do not have a Kra, a soul of divine consciousness, a Ka or Kaet, as it's called in ancient Kemet. They don't have that organ, that spiritual organ that would allow them to attune to the consciousness of Nyamewa and Nyameo, Amenet and Amen. So therefore, they can't experience the Supreme Being, and they don't want us to either. They can't attune to the forces in nature. They are repelled by the forces in nature. We always use that example of a magnet repelling another magnet when the same polarities are facing. The whites and their offspring are spirits of disorder. This is how they incarnate. They are individuals. They are not new. Nobody walking around on earth right now is new. This is their first incarnation. The whites and their offspring are the whites and their offspring based on their behavior. They came into being in this fashion because of their behavior, engaged in disorder, which repelled their crop thousands of years ago. They keep reincarnating without a crop, without an anchor in divine order, without that spiritual organ that aligns us with the forces in creation. And we went into that when we dealt with our race and identity and Afuraitkaitnut, Ancestral Religion broadcast. But we went into that in detail. But because they don't have that, they don't have the capacity to attune to the forces of nature, they are repulsive to the forces of nature, just like that magnet being repulsed. They can't get next to a large magnet. It's constantly repulsed. Cancerous cells can't harmonize with the other cells in the body. They are destroyed by the body, by the immune system, because they are out of order. They're disfigured and they are malfunctioning, so they are destroyed. The same is true with the cancerous cells in the body of black humanity, which are the whites and their offspring. They are the cancerous cells within creation. So they don't have the capacity to attune to the forces in nature. They are repelled by the forces in nature. They are angry about that reality. They don't want us to attune to the forces in nature, because when we do so, we attune to order. And when we attune to order, just like your body when it attunes to order, it also has a vehicle that stamps out disorder, which is the immune system, and the lymphatic system, which is governed by Benan, Abinah, or Heru Behudet, and Sechiman Sekmet. So they don't want us to attune to divine order, the spirits that animate order in creation, because then we would attune to the reality that they are spirits of disorder, and we would seek to eradicate them, exterminate them. So they had to create fake religions and philosophies to make us want to embrace them, the cancer cells, as opposed to rejecting them. They had to make us believe there were no deities. So this nonsense dealing with monotheism, politics. We can attune to the actual different deities, so we know who the gods and goddesses, the Abosom, the Orisha, the Bodu are through experience, which they cannot deal with. So that knocks out that idiocy of monotheism. No black person is foolish enough to embrace the idiocy of monotheism. We can attune to Nyamewa, the great mother, and Nyame, the great father, and see, experience, and be guided directly by them, so we know who they are, as well as the various Abosom, the various Orisha. The same is true, of course, with that understanding that knocks out atheism right out the box. Again, that's a political ploy created by the whites and their offspring to get our people not to just deny all of the various Abosom except for one fictional white deity, and then that one is in control. They want you to neglect all the divinities just in general and say they don't exist at all. And everything that happens happens just by virtue of the fact that it happens in nature. There's no right, there's no wrong, it's just nature and it's just reality. And if the whites and offspring come in and take over and slave and rape and pillage and murder and oppress, then hey, that's just nature. There's no such thing as morality, atheism, so you can do what you want, and you can't fault us for doing this, and you shouldn't be coming against us either. All that kind of nonsense tied up into atheism is political once again. Black people, we have the capacity to attune to the divinity, so of course the notion of atheism is idiotic. But you have Negroes who are trying to blacken up white pseudo-philosophies like atheism or monotheism. We talked about that last week. Now we're going to get into some more of these pseudo-practices. All of them are simply expressions of white pathology in reality. So when you look at metaphysics, exoteric or esoteric forms of Christianity, Christ consciousness, Islam, Judaism, Hebrewism, Gnosticism, hermeticism, Sufism, kabbalism, vendanta, Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, pseudo-Native American spirituality, New Age pseudo-spirituality, unconditional love, interracial coupling, multiculturalism, universalism, all of that nonsense. Bisexuality, homosexuality, moral relativism, extraterrestrialism, and more. They have nothing to do with our culture. They have nothing to do with ancient Kemet at all. So let's first deal with even the term Kemetic. First of all, ik as a suffix is not part of the language. This is why when you look at the title of the show, it says Kamiti culture, and we put in E or I, pronounce E at the end. That's a descriptive. So it's very similar to saying Kametian or Kametish. In English, adding the ish or the in or the ik. These are European linguistic devices for descriptive purposes. In ancient Kemet, and when people are reading the Medutu, the quote-unquote hieroglyphs, they'll have a concept called the Nisbi adjective, which is adding the E, the Y at the end, which sounds like an E at the end of something to denote. So when you have Kemet, you have Kameti. That would be the proper way of saying, quote-unquote, Kemetic, or Kemetish, or Kemetian, or Kamite or something like that. In the language, if you want to denote something, describe something as being of Kemet, it will be Kamiti. Just like you would have, if you're talking about Khanit, which is ancient Nubia, Khaniti, and so forth. So out the gate, that linguistic device of adding the ik at the end is Eurocentric. Just like we are Akan, if I say I am Akan in the Akan language, I would say Meye Akani, because ni means to be. So Akani, to be, ni Akan, Meye Akani. I wouldn't say I'm Akanic, or somebody wouldn't say they're Yorubic or Oduic, and we wouldn't say we're Kemetic. So if we're talking about the language, you would say Kemeti just in general. Then we need to deal with the reality that Kemet is a country. Of course, south of Kemet is Khanat, or the Khanit land, which is so-called Nubia. Kemet is a country. There are a number of different Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut ethnic groups living in the country at the same time. Of course, the languages were related, different dialects and so forth. So it's similar to in Ghana right now, you have Akan people, about 45% of the population, but you also have Hausa people, you also have Ebe people in Ghana, you also have Guan people in Ghana. You have different groups. They all can call themselves Ghanaian, but they're all different ethnic groups. But they also have not only their own languages, but then shamefully, the lingua franca, or the language, the official language is English. In ancient Kemet, the official language was used and shown through the script, the Medut and Toro, the sacred writing and so forth. They had a lingua franca, and that script captured the various dialects over thousands of years in reality. But there's a primal language going back tens of thousands of years. We date that based on the words of our own ancestresses and ancestors, not by pseudo-linguistics and the whites and offspring trying to trace languages back to a limited period or proto-languages. We're talking about based on what our ancestresses and ancestors said themselves. So when you look at the papyrus called the Turin Papyrus, they talk about the divine dynasties preceding the human dynasties and so forth. We dealt with some of that yesterday. It goes back, according to our own people, about 42,000 years ago when the first dynasties in Kemet were established under the direction of the Abosom. And when they talk about the divine dynasties, Ptah and his Ennead and so forth, and the Pautu Ntoru ruling, they're talking about people who are living, kings, queen mothers, and so forth, who will get possessed by the Abosom Ptah. And then you get direction when the person is possessed, just like we do today. Spirit possession takes place. The spirit enters the body of the person during ritual, and you communicate with that possessed priest, and the Abosom speaks through that individual. The same thing happens today in America, in the Caribbean, on the continent, in the Pacific, wherever black people are, spirit possession takes place, and we communicate with the ancestresses and ancestors. We communicate with the deity. When they talk about the reign of the divinities, this is what we're dealing with. People who are possessing on a regular basis and getting information through spirit possession, and therefore, in reality, the Abosom are ruling. If you went to a Yoruba priest who got possessed, they were a child of, an Olorisha for Oshun, and Oshun possesses the person during a ritual dance, and then someone asks a question of the Orisha while she's possessed. It's not the person standing in front of you giving you the answer to your question. It is Oshun speaking through the person while she is operating through the person's body. And the same thing happens with the king or queen mother in ancient Kemet. The Abosom possesses like Ptah and speaks through the individual. So that is the rule of the deity. And the same thing with the ancestral spirits, the rule of the Aku and so forth, the Akutu, the illuminated ones of the venerable ancestresses and ancestors. This is what we're talking about with regard to the divine dynasty. But it's going back 42,000+ years with regard to the establishment of a specific social order. Of course, we were speaking back then, so that's the same language we were speaking back then is that quote-unquote proto-language that all of the languages on the continent today, that's their parent language, all of them. North, Central, South, East, West, all of the languages are connected to that proto-language, that primal language, and that has its roots back then according to our own people, not pseudo-linguists. So Kemet is a country, people were speaking the language, and the term Kam, meaning black, of course it deals with the black soil, but it also deals with the black people, the skin color of the people. Kamet, meaning the black country, but also the dark brown people with black undertones who are connected to the abosom that governs the black soil. Asara called Kam Or, meaning the great black one. And his skin is black in that regard. Of course, when he's called Watch Or, you'll see Watch means green, and you'll have green skin dealing with resurrection, renewal, and so forth. But when he's Kam Or, black skin. This is the skin color, but also dealing with the soil, also dealing with the people who are governed by this abosom, by this divinity, and have that temperament. And because they have that temperament connected to that abosom energy or tumi, then it manifests in their phenotype. So they're all dark brown, but they have black undertone. Then you have the Desheru people. Desher means red, living in the desert regions, but also where the red clay is and so forth. They're connected to Set, as well as other divinities who have that sacred color red. His skin color is red. The red land, of course, Desheru or Deshert, the red land, but then the skin color of the divinity is red. The hot, fiery energy of that divinity generates the hot, fiery energy in his children, as well as other abosom who sacred color is red. For example, Sechima, Sekhmet, her sacred color, major sacred color is red as well. So people have that energy complex, and that energy within them, that hotter and drier energy, it manifests not only in their temperament, that hot, dry energy, but it also manifests in their phenotype, so they're dark brown with a red undertone. So you'll see, for example, Maasai people, you'll see some other individuals. We showed this in one of our articles, Kam Or, Kamit Or, Asar, Set, and the enslavement and restoration of the Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut in the West. You'll see some of them with their dark brown. You just see them, images of them, they're chocolate brown people, but then you see they have red undertones. Then you also see people dark brown with black undertones. This is why in ancient Kemet you have the reds and the blacks, and you'll see people showing the reds and the blacks. It has nothing to do with interracial coupling or miscegenation. You also see in Khanit, Nubia, side by side, the quote-unquote reds and the blacks. Skin color is what we're dealing with. You'll see in the Akan tradition, because we migrated from ancient Khanit, the Khanit land, Nubia, and we continue to call ourselves Akani, Akan, reestablished Akan civilization in the West, amongst the Oyoko people and others as well. You have the red Oyoko people, Oyoko Kaka, then you have the black Oyoko people, Oyoko Tuntun, and it's dealing with skin color. Dark brown people with red undertones, dark brown people with black undertones. The same reds and blacks in the royal lineage of the Oyoko people that you find the same reds and blacks in ancient Kemet and Khanat. So it's both. It's not one or the other. It's not, some say it means the black land, some people say it means the black people, and there's a battle between the two. It's not a battle between the two. The whites and their offspring always knew it meant it also related to the black skin. They just didn't want to admit it. Then you have some African-centered scholars who would say, well, no, it's just about the black people. It has nothing to do with the land because the determinative for country is there and not for the land, so it has nothing to do with the land. And, they just stayed on that side. In reality, it's both. And then you have other individuals saying Kam doesn't mean black, and that, of course, that's nonsense because we can prove that easily. So in reality, it's both. So when you're talking about it's a country, there are no priests, Kemetic priests. Just like there are no, in reality, there are no Nigerian priests or Ghanaian priests. There are priests of deities. There's a priest of an Orisha, a priest of an Abosom, a priest of a Vodou, but not a priest of a country per se. Are dealing with spirituality associated with Kemet, and people say I'm a Kemetic priest. Are you a priest of a divinity, a priestess of a divinity, or you're a priest of a country? And if you're a priest of a country, why are you using the English, term and so forth? What happens is people are not really connected to the culture. They're imitating what the whites and their offspring have said. So first dealing with the language itself, dealing with what the term means, being connected with actual aboson. And now when you talk about Kemeticism, and we'll use that term because that shows something that's pseudo, all the different kinds of things that are added into quote-unquote Kemeticism which don't exist. We talked about monotheism. We talked about atheism. Let's talk about next, for example, we'll go straight to our book, The Origin of the Term Yoga. And we'll put the link here. And we're not going to read through the whole thing. We just want to show one of these examples. So you have individuals who will take different practices that they find amongst the whites and their offspring. They'll retroactively date everything that the whites and their offspring do to ancient Kemet and say this is part of Kemetic culture. They'll do that with monotheism, say, oh, the ancient Kemites were monotheistic, and they'll be proud of that nonsense because deep down inside they hate their culture. They still hate themselves. They think the whites and their offspring are superior. They think their own ancestral culture is primitive and inferior. They don't want to admit that because they're calling themselves Afrocentric or African-centered and cultural, but then they're ashamed of their culture. So what they'll do is they'll appropriate the idiocy of white culture, blacken it up, and then they can feel proud of it. So they'll say, well, we created monotheism, so therefore we believe in the one God, which is idiotic. That's the rejection of reality. They do the same thing with atheism. And now when you look at yoga, for example, many people will say what the whites and their offspring are doing in Hinduism and in Buddhism, that's what our ancestresses and ancestors were doing all along. And then they'll include it as part of what they're doing. Some people include it based on misinformation. Some people include it based on they're deliberately trying to get money out of people and all kinds of nonsense. So, for example, when we wrote the book, Off the Origin of the Term Yoga, to first prove that all of the individuals have been talking about yoga is a Sanskrit term, chakra is a Sanskrit term. We've proven in the book that actually neither one of these terms come from Sanskrit at all. And if you look at the link, and if you click on the link real quick, and just in the very beginning, the first half of the book is dealing with the origin of the term yoga. The second half is dealing with the origin of the term chakra. So, Ankh, it means life, of course. Ankh also is shown in the medut of a domesticated animal, goat. And then around the neck of the goat is the symbol of the Ankh in the form of a yoke. So this is and of course yoga, they'll say, comes from the Proto-Indo-European term yunk. Yunk meaning to yoke, and then in English yunk becomes yoke. Yunk from the Proto-Indo-European quote-unquote language family comes from yonk in ancient Kemet. They didn't know why it meant yoke. They just knew the sound and the word yonk comes from ankh and it meant to yoke. We can show that ankh, of course, means life, but it also is spelled with the medut of a animal with the ankh around its neck in the form of a yoke that unites the term yoke with the term ankh, and then it shows a totally different orientation to what we're talking about. We show the origin of the common meditative posture when you see different divinities sitting in this posture coming from the great ancestral totem of the so-called dog-headed baboon that you see sitting in that specific posture. You see the various divinities sitting in these postures. What we show in the book, not only the breaking down the origin of the term Ankh, what it's associated with, it deals with life. You see the divinities putting the Ankh to the nose of the individual to give them life. You're also in the after world, but also, giving life to the king and so forth, to enliven them with their energy. When they provoke the energy of the abosom, the deity will be holding the Ankh and so forth. So in life, it's used as a talisman to enliven or invigorate the individual. through invocation of the divinity. After death, the spirit of the individual is invigorated with that talisman as well. We show the connection between the Ankwa, as well as Ankwa in the Akan language, which means life. So Ankwa, Akan means life, Ankh means life in ancient Kemet. It's the same word. We show the Ankwa doll, which is the doll with the large head and the two arms sticking out in the form of an Ankh because it is an Ankh. They call that a fertility doll because it's used for fertility purposes, ritually prepared for somebody who needs to have children and they're barren and so forth, ritually prepared. They tie the little fertility doll around their back. It generates that fertility in the womb and it allows them to give life. But then those sculptures, a form of those sculptures are also used for funerary practices when somebody makes their transition. And a sculpture associated with the deceased individual, one of the Nkwa sculptures is set out and there are food offerings given and so forth. So just like in ancient Kemet, when that Ankh figure is used for the deceased spirit to help them, enliven them or invigorate them so they can make a smooth transition to the ancestral realm to live with the other ancestresses and ancestors, and not get trapped, earthbound, harassing their living relatives for decades. Just like it's used in the after-death state. The Ankh, same thing with the Nkwa, Akua, and Akan in the after-death state, but also during life. The Ankh is invigorating people during life in ancient Kemet. When we invoke the Abosom and they show the Ankh at the nose and so forth, we also use the Akua to invigorate or help the woman, become fertile. So we're talking about life. So when people say there's a discipline of yoga, they sit down and get in postures and practice yoga and so forth. Well, the term yoga, Ankh, means life. So you don't practice life. You don't practice, a discipline. What happened was our people would sit in front of our shrines just like we do today. You pour libation, give an offering at the shrine, then you sit down and listen to the Nananum Nsamanfo, the Ancestresses and Ancestors, listen to the Abosom. Sometimes when the Abosom come forward at the Nkomre, at the shrine, the energy of the Abosom will influence you and force you to change positions as you're sitting there so you can receive the energy of the Abosom optimally. No different than ritual dance. When drums begin to play and you're at a ritual and someone gets possessed by the Abosom, it is the Abosom, once they possess, that will make the person dance in certain ritual movements, and they know this is the dance of Oshun, this is the dance of Awusi, this is the dance of Yao, this is the dance of these different Abosom, because the Abosom makes them dance in that fashion, makes them move in specific movement. It's no different than when you're sitting in front of the Nkomre, in front of the shrine. They will make you shift when you're communicating. So that shift in posture is a reaction to what the Abosom are emanating. It's a reaction to their energy. It is, getting in harmony with them. The whites and their offspring saw it sitting in front of shrines in ancient Kemet, said, we can sit down and shift postures as well, and they began practicing shifting postures and called that a discipline. They're not communicating with anything, but they're shifting posture. They're not being influenced by an Abosom that's connected to their blood circle. They're not being influenced by the Nananoma and Samanfo. What they're doing is, meditating on the abyss and other kinds of nonsense and their lust and foolish philosophy. So that is a totally different concept than a quote-unquote discipline of yoga. But people will take the pseudo-discipline of yoga and, import it into ancient Kemet and say what these Hindus were doing, just blacken it up, and this is what our people were doing. When you look at, for example, the philosophy, you read books, for example, by Muwada Ashby, he's just teaching a distilled Hinduism, pseudo-philosophy, blackened up, just giving you Hinduism, giving it in blackface and saying this is what our people were teaching. The notion of who the Great Mother and the Great Father are, the Creator and Creatress are in relationship to the Great Mother and Great Father because they're different. The Supreme Being and the Creator and Creatress are different divinities. The nature of the deities, the nature of the Ancestresses and Ancestors who are connected to our blood circle, the nature of all of these entities in interaction with one another. He gives a false philosophy with regard to all of that. And the pseudo-mystical implications of the Book of the Dead and all the stuff that he puts out, inaccurate, because it's just a distilled Hinduism blackened up to appear to be, quote-unquote, Kemetic. If you look at his descriptions of the spiritual anatomy of a human being, the Ba, the Ka, the Ak, the Sahu, the Ab, the Kahaibit, the Rain, the Sekhem, and so forth, all of the definitions he gives for these different aspects of our spiritual anatomy are inaccurate. So when you read the book, you'll see that it's inaccurate. We did a 7-part series on the spiritual organs within Afurakanu and Afuraitkaitnut people, which are in the broadcast archives. We show that Ak and Ba and Ka and Ab and Hati, Kahaibit and Rain and all these different aspects of the spiritual anatomy, they all exist in the Akan culture by the exact same names with the exact same meaning. But it's not something dated, of course. We still use these terms in our language today. The term Rain, R-N, in ancient Kemet, they often spell R-E-N and say Ren because they didn't know the pronunciation. We say Rain in Akan language. It's Rain in ancient Kemet. We have Ka, as well as Kra, which is the soul, divine consciousness. We have the Ba. We have every aspect of the spiritual anatomy in our language well-defined and lived on a consistent basis. So we give the proper definitions of these aspects of the spiritual anatomy, and then you can compare that with not only what Wada Ashby teaches, he's just an example, but what he teaches is no different than what the vast majority of individuals out here are putting forward, and simply because, number one, they'll take information from the whites and their offspring, then they'll add a little Hinduism to it, add a little pseudo-metaphysics to it. If it's just beyond something archaeological, they'll add a little Hinduism or pseudo-mysticism to it and say this is what our people were teaching. So people are constantly being misinformed about the nature of the Supreme Being, the nature of the Creator and Creatress, who are different from the Supreme Being, the nature of the deity, their relationship to us through our blood circles, the nature of the Ancestresses and Ancestors, and their relationship to us, not only through our blood circles, but their relationship to our divine functioning in creation, our divine, quote-unquote, destiny or Nkrabia. None of that will you find in the book works of Wada Ashby or anybody else who's basically teaching the same thing. So that's misinformation. Now you have other individuals who are engaged or see certain things. They won't take what the Hindus and others put forward. They notice that there's something to this whole notion of sitting in front of a shrine and being moved into different positions. So, for example, you have Kemetic yoga. Now, you have people who started Kemetic yoga. Yarsira Hotep in Chicago started Kemetic yoga a number of decades ago. Then you have other people appropriating that name and adding it to Hinduism and things like that. If you look at what we talk about with regard to culture, innovating and practicing and remaining true to the essence of culture, what is Kemeticism, what is Kemeti culture, and so forth, it is a possibility for us to have the necessity to innovate or practice something slightly different than we did in the past. For example, a beaver building a dam, they may build it in a certain way with certain kinds of materials that they have in a certain region. If they're relocated to another region, they're still going to build a dam, but they may build it slightly differently, but they still have the same essence of getting the same kinds of materials, building the dam for the same purpose. We're here in America. We may do things slightly different. There may be certain plant life and mineral life that we don't have access to, that we had access to on the continent. So when we engage in ritual practice and deal with ritual medicine, we have to use what we have in this environment, and we have to innovate based on where we are and what we're doing. If you understand the essence of ancestral religion, which is harmonizing with your Kra, the soul, the divine consciousness within your head region, encoded within that is your divine function, and everything you're doing is an invocation or evocation of the Abosom or the Nananom Unsamafo, then you'll be led to different kinds of innovations or practices or reclaiming certain practices that are in reality. So when we talked about, for example, sitting in front of the shrine, as you see images you see in the book, sitting in front of the shrine, you'll see a scribe sitting in front of the dog-headed baboon, the baboon of Tahuti, and you see the scribe sitting in front of him. They'll say, well, he's sitting in front of Tahuti. But that sculpture of Tahuti is a sculpture, but what it's showing is this person is sitting under the direction of an abosom, an invisible spirit. This is spirit communication which is taking place. So he's sitting down learning from a deity. And just like he could change positions if a different abosom comes forth, and we move into different positions, the whites and their offspring start making that into a discipline of just moving into different positions and breathing. That's not normal. We're invoking something, someone, an entity. We're evoking an ancestral spirit when we engage that process, no different than ritual dance. So somebody like Yasir Rahotep will explain that when he was in the temple in Kemet, his Nsamampo began to move him in different positions that he never had done before, and something he was not expecting. And he incorporates that into what he's doing because he was motivated by the Abosom and Nsamampo. So the essence of that kind of practice is still the same thing we're doing. So it's gone back to something real. Invocation of Abosom, evocation of Nananom and Samafo. So when you have that authentic essence in a practice, then you can do that. Of course, there are people who will take that practice and they will corrupt it and run around, and if you don't have protocols in place and you certify people and so forth, you will have some Negroes who start doing all kinds of crazy things with that. But that's just an example of, you have some people who are just teaching Hinduism, teaching white culture in blackface. And you have other individuals who are moved by their abosom and the Nsamampo to engage in a practice and then find out later that this is what has been going on for thousands of years, and the whites and their offspring appropriated that and took it into, turned it into something that originally it was not. So there's a difference there. It's the same thing when you see people practicing Reiki, for example. Some people say, well, I practice the culture of ancient Kemet. But then they start trying to augment their practice with a number of different practices from pseudo-spirituality of the whites and their offspring, because they see all they're doing is repeating prayers off the walls of Kemet, standing in certain positions, putting on certain clothes, saying little prayers, but they're communicating with nothing or no one. So they have to augment their practice to make themselves feel like they're doing something. So they'll start talking about Reiki and aromatherapy and all these different modalities that they learn from the whites and their offspring. If you are not invoking abosom that are connected to your blood circle, which only Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut people have, and if you are not evoking your ancestresses and ancestors who are honorable, your Nananom and Samafo that are connected to your blood circle, you are not engaged in real ritual practice. So if you're just going around, which many people have done, they'll become an Akan priest, quote-unquote, Akan priestess, Yoruba priest or priestess, and they're going to study Reiki and get, quote-unquote, certified and attuned and all of this stuff. What are they doing? They're showing that there's an impotence in the practice that they're engaged in, because they probably got that information from individuals who are initiated into the Yoruba tradition or Akan tradition who were misinformed themselves or deliberately misinforming people. They feel a void in their practice, so they think they need to go and augment their practice. But they don't want to say that they're augmenting the practice because they're supposed to be African-centered, and they're supposed to be, cultural. So they'll go find things in white New Age bookstores and online and so forth. They'll bring them back. They'll blacken them up, and then they'll put them forward as, this is what our people were doing all along. But when you look at the philosophy behind the practice, that determines whether or not our people were doing them. How do you determine whether or not our people was doing these things and the whites and their offspring stole it, or if it was just what the whites and their offspring were doing and we're just repeating? When you look at the philosophy that undergirds the practice, then you can determine instantaneously where it derives from, the provenance of the practice. So when you're looking at Reiki, you're looking at the Japanese and looking at what they're talking about, Usui and other individuals, this is pseudo-white philosophy. You're not coming out of that practice learning to connect with your Nananom Nsamamfo, connecting with the abosom that were born into the world with you, the Orisha that are connected to your head, the Vodou that are connected to your Selido, your soul, divine consciousness, connected to your Krawaf, your Akan. You're not coming away from that. That's your primary focus. What's encoded in your Kra, your soul, your divine consciousness, is the function you came into the world to execute. If you're not aligning with that divinity and the abosom connected to your blood circles, your patriclan and matriclan, as well as your nananoman samako, you're not doing anything. You're not coming away from attunements in Usui Reiki, learning anything about the abosom that you were born into the world with, and their echiwadye or their taboos, or the abosom connected to your matriclan or patriclan. They dissuade you from all of that because it's an inferior pseudo practice. There's no basis in our culture. Now you will find other individuals who recognize, wait a minute, somebody healing with hands. Our people have been doing that for thousands of years. So you'll see that we've been doing that in America on the plantations. When we escaped from plantations, still engaging in ritual practices, some of our people remained on plantations, and eventually, after the end of enslavement, we were forced into these churches. But if somebody got sick, somebody gets possessed by an ancestral spirit and lays hands on people and heals them. It has nothing to do with the Japanese. It doesn't have anything to do with some pseudo-interpretation of a symbol given by some Japanese. It has nothing to do with an attunement or anything like that. It comes directly from our ancestresses and ancestors possessing us and then operating through us to heal. That's not something we learn from the whites and their offspring. So you can see where they stole that aspect of it from. But the key is, what is the philosophy? Once you recognize the philosophy, you reject that pseudo-Reiki nonsense totally. You have, for example, we know a number of different individuals in different states who recognize the ancestral connection to laying hands and Reiki. Some of them had taken Reiki first and then realized it was some nonsense and started connecting with their ancestresses and ancestors and created their own practice dealing with laying of hands because they were people in their family who were going to be that. Some of them will be midwives. Some of them will be healers, traditional healers. Some of them will be herbalists. Some of them will, in that practice, will be laying hands on people and healing just from the gate. So they recognize the stark contrast between the nonsense they learned in Reiki class and, what they got directly from their ancestors and ancestors. And then when they look back to their mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers and spoke to people in the family, to talk about, well, your great-grandmother used to lay hands and heal people as well. Your great-great-grandmother used to lay hands and heal people as well. So they developed, re-established those practices rooted in culture, minus the Christian influence. So you have people like Sister Kajara, Nia Nevedhet with Ra Seki, Hermetic Reiki, but it's Ra Seki, her Nsamapo gave her that title to use dealing with Ra and Sekhmet. You have other individuals, Afuraitkaitnut, she has Katanada, then you also have Obratumi with Nana Akila Chiku. You have a number of different individuals who are doing something based on ancestral communication, Unkom as well as Akom, possession and communication, as opposed to the nonsense. So you have to make a distinction. So there are some things that the whites and their offspring have stolen, elements of it they've stolen, but then they added their pseudo-philosophy. The philosophy is the first thing that's the key that's perverse, but even the way they practice is perverse as well. So their practice of it as well as the philosophy is perverse, so you reject it totally and get back to your ancestral practice. So these are some of the things that you'll find out, and you have to make distinction. What is Pseudo-Kemeticism and what are things that are actually, in essence, an authentic practice that come directly from our people that you can verify. If it can be verified to be authentic from our ancestral blood circles, then it's part of our culture. If it's something that's coming from the whites and their offspring, then you reject it. The vast majority of the individuals who are talking about yoga, talking about Reiki, talking about these different things, they are engaged in pseudo-white practice. And that has nothing to do with ancient Kemet or any Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut culture at all. If you look at this notion of, which we touched on yesterday, but we can mention again because we have it in the link, Christ consciousness. You have a number of individuals talking about Christ consciousness, and this is what we are trying to get to. of course, totally inaccurate, has nothing to do at all with ancient Kemet. The term Christ does not come from karas, meaning to make the mummy, or the mummy, karas, to make the mummy, and karas, the mummy itself, has nothing to do with that. Karas is the root of the term karust. In English, also karustol or crystal. And we talked about yesterday the body itself, when we would mummify the body, as we're growing and developing and aging and becoming mature. In white culture, people are becoming aged, they're degenerating, they're decaying, and they're deteriorating, and then they end up dying. In our culture, advance in age is an advance towards maturity, and eventually it's an advance towards crystallization. You crystallize all the experiences and knowledge and wisdom you have, and then you make your transition, and then we crystallize the body of the individual through mummification. Then that body becomes a potent shrine, the most potent ancestral shrine imaginable. Just like you have a crystal that has magnetic energy, well, the shrine, the body itself, becoming crystallized through mummification, being a large crystal, is the greatest ancestral shrine you can have, because it's the greatest magnet for the spirit of the individual who used to take up residence in that body. So you go to the cemetery, pour libation, where that body has been crystallized, or in America prior to, earlier in the previous century, when our people didn't have the funds to, bury our people in elaborate cemeteries and everything else. In the South, we would bury our deceased under the floor of our homes or in the backyard, because we would have dirt floors, and we would bury our deceased, our grandmothers and grandfathers, under the floor. So when we pour libation, we would really pour libation over the bodies of our ancestresses and ancestors, or in the backyard and so forth. That physical body is the greatest magnet, the greatest shrine. So that karas is the crust, the encrusted body, the hardened body, the crystallized body, and so forth. It's an ancestral shrine. It has nothing to do with Christ. It has nothing to do with the Gnostic Jesus. It has nothing to do with you becoming christened or, ascending. It has nothing to do with any of that. Totally inaccurate. So we went into the etymology yesterday, including the Heri Seshta, which became Christos, and Christ, which is a corruption of a title of kind of priest in ancient Kemet. Heri Seshta, he who is chief, king, leader of the that which is hidden, secret, or sacred. Seshta, Heri Seshta. That's no different than a Babalao, father, Baba of the Awo, that which is hidden or inaccessible to the people who are not in alignment with their divine function. Babalao. Same thing. Heri Seshta means the exact same thing. People are not, their goal in life is not to ascend to become a Babalao. A Babalao has a specific function in creation. Everybody in Kemet was not, their goal in life was not to spiritually become a Heri Seshta, to become a priest. That's a specific function for a specific individual. Your function, which is separate from that, different from that, is just as valuable as that, but they have their own function, you have your own function. Your lungs have its function, and the body needs the lungs to breathe in air and so forth. The heart has its own function. The liver has its own function. The brain has its own function. They're totally different, but no one of those are any more important than the other. You can't say, well, the brain is more important than all the others. You don't need any lungs as long as you have the brain. And the same is true for the heart, the lungs, and so forth. So all of us have a divine function. If we're Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut people, what is the function encoded within your crop, in your soul, your divine consciousness? And what abosom have been assigned to you to give you the power to execute that function? And what Nananum and Samako ancestresses and ancestors have been assigned to you by the Supreme Being to guide you towards proper execution of that function without creating disorder in the process, based on your ancestry, based on your blood circle. All of it is intertwined. So if that's not connected to your spiritual practice, then you don't have a spiritual practice. And when people are talking about Christ consciousness, that it has no basis in reality. So let's go to, let's get another one. Looking at Gnosticism, for example. Some people want to say they're Kemetic Gnostics. Gnosticism was the ancient culture, the ancient religion, and this is what we were doing, and this is the sacred, esoteric aspect of Christianity that our ancestresses and ancestors created. Like Sufism was the sacred, esoteric aspect of Islam, and kabbalism, the sacred, path of Judaism. Totally inaccurate. If you look at Gnosticism, what do they say about what is their structure and philosophy? They talk about the true great God, and then you have Sophia, who created, through her flaws, the demiurge and so forth, and then people are following the demiurge because they're not able to get to the true great God, and salvation is getting back to the truth. That is totally inaccurate. That's total nonsense. Sophia, for example, the abosom of wisdom comes from Sophie Yabui, which is the female abosom of divine wisdom, the female counterpart of Tahuti, the abosom of divine wisdom, male. He's Brechiri Hunwate in Akan. She's Abrewa in Akan. So these are male and female forces of divine wisdom. They codify through their scribing divine law, which Ma'an, Ma'at, the male and female forces of divine law and balance, they contain and they codify and they express to the world. But you see the application of that divine order, which is wisdom, the application of divine order, divine law, manifests through these two forces in nature, Tahuti and Seshat, also called Sofit Abui. They get Sofit Abui, and then Sofit becomes Sophia, and then later that actually is the root of the term Sophie or Sufi, meaning the followers of wisdom and all that other nonsense. This is where that comes from. So when they talk about Sophia, through her flaws, helped produce the demiurge and lack of consciousness and degeneration, that's totally idiotic and has no basis in reality. They can't communicate with Sophie Yabu. They can't align with her. They can't get possessed by her. They can't engage in divinatory practices with her. They know nothing about her. They don't know who Tahuti is. They'll try to say Tahuti was Hermes, the thrice great, and lived at a certain time and it was a depth. That's because the whites and their offspring cannot communicate with the actual abosom Tahuti. They have no capacity to do so. They can't communicate with Orumila. They can't communicate with Brechi Unuwate. They can't communicate with them. Even though they try to lie and say they do, but they cannot. And therefore, they will make him a quote-unquote historical figure and adept who is walking around teaching like a little prophet, or even some of the whites and their offspring who have corrupted the tradition in the Yoruba tradition will say, well, Orumila was a prophet, and he had disciples, and he preached Ifa. Total nonsense. Islamic influence, Christian influence, nonsense. These Orisha, these Abosom are forces in nature that possess and communicate with us. So when you see that, and then you see the notion of salvation amongst the Gnostics, talking about all human life is suffering, and the only way you can get out of suffering, even the creation is flawed because of these emanations from the true great God, and the only way you can get back to escaping suffering is to get around these emanations of the true great God and get back to the true great. That's total nonsense. They're not talking about a great father and great mother, Amen and Amenet, because they can't deal with them. They talk about a demiurge. In reality, they don't understand that concept. Amen and Amenet are the great mother and the great father. They contracted that to the great God and not talking about the great mother. Then they'll talk about a demiurge and how he was flawed. In reality, Ra and Ra'et are the creator and creatress who are directed by Nyamewa, Nyameo, Amenet, and Amen to create the universe. Just like you are a being and you have life force energy, procreative power you can utilize through your reproductive organs, direct your energy to create a child. You are the being directing your life force energy. Amen and Amenet are directing Ra and Ra'et, the creative power, to go and create the universe. They miscast that in reality originally as a demiurge, and then they make it corrupt and all kinds of insane nonsense, and then they create a salvation philosophy based on getting around that. Total nonsense. And our people are trying to incorporate that foolishness into their quote-unquote Kemeticism and that pseudo-philosophy into Kemeticism. that leads into a related corruption when you deal with Vedanta and you deal with Buddhism. And many people are including Vedanta, Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism. They're including all of that, those pseudo-philosophies, into the philosophy of ancient Kemet. They'll talk about there is no great God, there is no great goddess, there's just us. We're the great God, we're the great goddess. There's no great God outside of you, everything is inside of you. That comes from Jainism, which is not ancient Afuraitkaitnut culture. That's a perversion of our culture. That is Buddhism. That's nonsense. But you have people who call themselves engaging in metaphysics, pseudo-metaphysics, esoteric, quote-unquote, African spiritual sciences, talking that nonsense, talking about unconditional love and all kinds of nonsense. Now, you can pinpoint where these pseudo-doctrines come from. If you look at Buddhism, they don't deal with a great divinity. They talk about all of human life is suffering, and the way to escape suffering through the noble path, the eightfold path, is to eventually escape the cycle of reincarnation. That's what they will teach. Total nonsense, because they can't communicate with the Supreme Being. They can't communicate with the Abosom, so they'll say that the deities have no basis, no connection to your spiritual development, because the deities are trying to develop themselves and they're on a lower level. Then you have these pseudo-metaphysical Negroes talking about, when you become the God yourself, then you're in control of the deities and you tell them what to do and you're not supposed to be worshiping them. You're the great God. That's pure stupidity. Whether somebody's talking about that, associating it with ancient Kemet, it has nothing to do with ancient Kemet. It has to do with Buddhism. It has to do with Gnosticism. It has to do with that nonsense. It has nothing to do with Vodou. It has nothing to do with the Yoruba tradition, Akan tradition, none of that. You can pinpoint these foolish doctrines and see exactly where they come from, and they have nothing to do with ancient Kemet and any Afuraitkaitnut culture, period. When people try to say that our goal is to escape the cycle of reincarnation, they may not use those terms, but they're saying that's what the goal in creation is. So they'll say, they'll use terms from the culture. They'll say, you have an Ori, like in the Yoruba tradition, and you have a destiny, and everybody has a destiny, and once you fulfill your destiny, then you won't have to return. Or they'll say, you have an Okra. They've read a little bit about the Akan tradition, but it's still misinformed. They'll say, you have an Okra, which is a spark of life from the Creator, and it's divine. Of course, the Okra is not the spark of life, but it is a divinity. It's divine, but it's not divine because it's a spark of life. It's a deity, which they don't understand. So all of these individuals talking about the Okra is the spark of life, and it's divine, and it comes from Nyame, and it's the divine part of you. But they don't understand it's an actual deity that we communicate with, give offerings to, learn from. It will manifest and show itself, him or herself, to the individual. They know nothing about that. So they're misinforming people. Whether it's in our Akan tradition, Yoruba tradition, or whatever. They'll say in our Akan tradition, the Akra is the spark of life, and you have an Nkrabiya, you have a mission, and once you fulfill that mission, then you will live in the ancestral world. But if you don't fulfill that mission, you'll keep returning, keep reincarnating until you fulfill that mission. That's not Afuraitkaitnut culture. You have to keep returning, quote unquote, sort of like a punishment until you fulfill your role, and then you can live forever in eternity with either the Ancestresses and Ancestors or in the spirit realm, meaning you can escape the cycle of reincarnation. They're saying the exact same thing the Buddhists are saying, as well as the Hindus are saying, wrapping it up in Akan jargon or Yoruba jargon or Vodou jargon and giving you the same foolish philosophy. We're not sent into the world to we have to develop ourselves, and once we develop ourselves, then we don't have to be on this level of existence. We can go to a higher level. Then this existence is like a jail. It's like a hell. It's like a place for wayward spirits until you develop yourself to get to a higher level. That comes from the whites and their offspring. Their philosophy is the physical world, all of human life is suffering. You'll find that in Buddhism, you find that in Hinduism, you find that in Gnosticism, but then you get further west through Christianity and Islam and so forth and Judaism. They're saying the exact same thing. They just place it as you were born in sin, shaped in iniquity. and all this nonsense. And through the salvation of the Savior, that's the only way you will get to quote-unquote heaven, and then you can live in peace and eternity. You have to get away from the world, be of the world but not in the world, and you want to get to heaven, because once you do that, then you're straight. Get away from this world. The world is evil, the flesh is evil, the flesh is weak, all of that nonsense. The same thing they say in Western Eurasia. When they migrated to Eastern Eurasia, they continued the same nonsense, and you find it in Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, all of that, Jainism. They're trying to deny the flesh, deny the desires, deny anything. You don't want action without, action without action, as they would say in Taoism, that kind of nonsense. Action without intent. Even to have an intent is a, perversion of the divine flow of creation, and you don't want even to place your intent into the divine flow of the energy of creation, because then you're polluting the natural flow of things, because your intent is pollution. That's pure idiocy. Our people, we understand that we're given a function to execute in creation and are sent into the world by the Supreme Being to execute a function. The cells in your body, who are cells of the organs, the liver and the spleen and the pancreas and so forth, they're not sent to be, created to be and fashioned to be cells of those organs, because they're on a lower level of spiritual development. And once they develop themselves, they can elevate beyond the body, and they can live in harmony with Inyame wa Inyame later. But while they're in that physical body, they're here just to learn lessons so they can elevate later and ascend later. That's idiotic. They were created to be functioning within that specific organ, to support those, functions of that organ. And when they do that, they're supporting and living in harmony with the great divine body at the same time. And we ourselves within the great divine body of the Supreme Being, and we are fashioned. We're talking about Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut people only, not white Europeans, not white Americans, not white Asians, not white Hindus, white Arabs, white pseudo-Native Americans, white Hispanics. None of them are Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut people. None of them have a krawa, soul, the divine consciousness, and they have no divine function. We have a divine function. We are cells within the great divine body, so we have something. We're here to execute a specific function. We're not here because we're weak, wayward, and polluted, and we're trying to figure out a way to elevate so we can ascend and be in heaven for the rest of eternity. So either way they place it and couch it, whatever terms they use, they're still engaged in the same pseudo-philosophy, escaping the physical world, escaping the flesh, escaping the cycle of reincarnation. Their physical flesh is perverse, as we talked about last night. Melanin recessive flesh, it is perverse. It is a hell for a spirit. The way they operate, the way they establish their societies are a reflection of who they are. They're disordered societies. They despise the physical world. They cannot harmonize with plant life, animal life, mineral life, and of course, Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, human life, and the abosome that undergird the physical universe. We can harmonize with them because we have the same thing in us that the abosome have in them. We have the same kra, we have the same divine essence in us that the abosome have in them. The spirit that animates the sun, moon, earth, mother, rivers, oceans, we can attune to them. It's a harmonious place for us. We're in harmony when we're in the world. We love the world. We love Asase Afua, our earth mother. We love the abosome of the sun, atmosphere, and so forth. It's harmony for us. It's hell for them. So they want to escape the world, but they want us to reject and deny everything that surrounds us. That's akin to somebody saying, you're standing on earth, listen, don't breathe any of that air, don't drink any of that water, don't take in any of that sunlight, don't get any fruits or vegetables or anything from the earth. All of that is evil. Just listen to me. They're saying the same thing when they tell you don't attune your spirit to the spirit that animates the sun, the spirit that animates the oceans, the spirit that animates the earth mother, the spirit that animates the mountains and so forth. Don't allow your spirit to be fed and invigorated by them. Just listen to this little white crack on the wall, or follow this little white pseudo-guru and so forth. So this is what they're promoting. And then our people couch these foolish philosophies into the terms of ancestral religion and they're pushing the same nonsense. So they'll deny the existence of the Great Mother and the Great Father beyond lip service. They will not teach you that you can attune to Amen and Amenet and receive information from Amen and Amenet. How many of the pseudo-metaphysical teachers who claim to be traditional priests and priestesses and dealing with the African sciences, how many of them will tell you communication with Amen and Amenet or Nyame, Nyamewa, Mawu, and Lisa is critical to our practice, critical to our development, critical to our spiritual cultivation and functioning in creation? How many of them will tell you that the abosom that you are born into the world with is key to your development? The reason you are in the world is to serve as a vessel for that energy to come into the world. They don't give you that kind of information. They're giving you Hinduism cloaked in blackface. Okay, so we have a couple of questions, and then we're going to continue. All right. Michiawo, greetings. Number 3980. You had a question or comment? Hold on 1 second. Okay. Number 3980. You had a question or comment?
Talking to me. No. I'm just listening. Hello?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I got you. Just listen. All right. It's up.
Okay.
Okay. And, okay, Michiawo, number 6418. You had a question or a comment?
Greetings. I do. This is my first time joining tonight. And is this being recorded, and what text are you following as you are sharing the information with us? I'd like to follow along for the next call.
Okay. And may I say for tuning in. So, yes, all of the broadcasts are recorded. All of them are, as soon as the recording is over, within about 10 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes, it's automatically available as an archive on the Blog Talk Radio on our channel. And all of the previous 76 broadcasts are out there as well. If you go to the Nhoma page on our website, ODWIRA, F as in free, O.com. That's our website, ojirapo.com. And when you scroll through the index and you get to the publications page, the Nhoma page, and click on that, you'll see all of our 15 books. And then we also have about 60-plus articles as well, but the 15 books there, a couple of them we reference here. And so you'll see those there. You can go directly there.
Okay. Madasi.
Okay. Yenyaseda. Okay. So we want to... Okay, we want to make sure we didn't miss anything in the chat room before we move forward. So as you look at, for example, we put a link for the Maranechi, Divine Law and Divine Hate. And when you look at part 5 of Divine Law and Divine Hate, and we talk about the Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, or quote-unquote Afrocentric worldview. We talk about the basis of the worldview dealing with the Great Mother, the Great Father, divine order, the expansive and contractive poles of divine order, which is divine law, which is the same word as love. Law and love is the same word, divine law, and divine hate, the acceptance of order and the rejection of order, the law or love of order and the hate or rejection of disorder. That's what divine order is. Amen, that share the divine plan, the divine arrangement. If you have an order, there are certain things that are acceptable and certain things that are not acceptable. Certain things that are embraced, certain things that are rejected to maintain the integrity of the order. If your body is ordered in a specific fashion, you have organs and organ systems and cells, and they interact, trillions of cells in a specific manner. And then you have some entity that comes in, bacteria, toxins, and so forth, that will disrupt the order of the body. So you have an immune system, lymphatic system that will isolate those cells, kill them, and reject them in order to maintain the integrity of the divine order of your functioning. order in and of itself, the great divine body of the Supreme Being, is the created universe. The abosome, the forces in nature, are the organs within the great divine body, and we, Afurakanu people, like animal life, mineral life, we are the cells within those great divine organs. When we live in harmony with those organs and their functioning, then we maintain order and creation. When we get outside of harmony, then we have problems. And we have rites and rituals to realign ourselves with harmony. That is what Nana Som, Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, Ancestral Religion is about. No matter if it's Yoruba, Khan, Ebe, Igbo, Bambara, whatever it is, fundamentally is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. Through ritual, we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we restore balance to our lives by rejecting those things, objects, deeds, and entities that we need to reject or hate or repel in order to maintain the integrity of divine order and restore balance and order to our existence. So that is the essence of Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, Ancestral Religion, the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance, the expansive and contractive poles of Ancestral Religion. ODWIRA, which is the name of our show on Tuesdays, ODWIRA means purification, so we deal with the purificatory process. Purification operationalizes Nana Som. Purification operationalizes the practice of ancestral religion. So we ritually incorporate law, ritually restore balance, but we need to do that through purification. So we purify our thoughts, intentions, actions, bodies, movements, behavior, and so forth, so we can align ourselves and realign ourselves with divine order. Part of the purification process is not only purifying ourselves individually, but socially, and that includes the purification of our culture, because our culture is being corrupted. So not only have we been given Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, all of this nonsense, we reject that. So when you look at the Kuku Tuntum, for example, the Ancestral Jurisdiction, one of our books, we prove that Jesus never existed, Yeshua never existed, Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, Yeshua ben Pandera, Muhammad, Malal, Allah, Yahweh, Elohim, all these characters never existed of any race or in any form whatsoever. So we smash all of that. But then we also have to, and so that's a purificatory process in and of itself. But then when people want to say, hey, I want to embrace ancestral culture now, I want to embrace my true ancestral religion, I have a natural inclination towards aligning myself with divine order through the agency of the abosome that govern me and the ancestresses and ancestors who walk with me. I have a natural inclination towards that because it's encoded within me. You start moving in that direction. You want to embrace ancestral culture, and then you're met with pseudo-philosophies masquerading as ancestral culture in blackface. So this is why in this episode of ODWIRA and just across the board, we're engaged in that jira, or that purificatory process to purge this nonsense out of the practice of the culture and expose the nonsense that's going on. So I just want to look in the chat room real quick to make sure I didn't miss anybody's comments or questions. Okay, let's see. Hold on one second. Just want to make sure we didn't miss anything. Thought I saw something. Thought I scrolled by something. Okay, so somebody said no wonder these different schools of thought were so contradictory, because they all come from the same source. And one question is, so will we communicate with our Ori to help sort out all of this confusion? Yes. Encoded within your Ori, which in Yoruba it is the Ori, in Akan is the Okra, male, divinity, Okrawa, female, in ancient Kemet, the Ka, or the Kaet. Your soul, divine consciousness, is a deity that dwells in the head region, encoded within that fourth, dwelling in your head region, just like the brain has the cerebral cortex with the right and left hemispheres, and the cerebellum with the right and left hemispheres. and encoded within the brain are the instructions you need to execute your function in your all the functions in the body. Encoded within your spirit's brain, which is your okra, is an entity, just like the brain is an entity within your head region that's different from the other entities in your body, like the lungs, heart, spleen, and so forth. The brain is a different entity, and it regulates those entities. Well, in your spirit body, in the head region of your spirit body, is your what we call the kra in the Akan tradition, the kra or the krawa. In ancient Kemet, it's called the ka, male, or kayet, female. In Yoruba tradition, it's the ori. And encoded within that spirit's brain is the function you came into the world to execute, the manner in which you need to execute that function, the specific configuration of energy you've been given to will to execute that function, and how to use that energy without creating disorder in the process. All of that is encoded within the fourfold division of the Ori, or the fourfold division of the Kra. So when you want to attune to what is correct, what is in harmony with order, at any moment, at any time throughout the course of your life, you're aligning with your own Kra, your bosom that's in your head region, to do so. So that's the key to spirituality. The forces in nature, the abosom, the orisha, the vodou, and so forth, they empower you, they replenish your energy and empower you so that you can execute the directives coming from your Kra. The Ancestresses and Ancestors, the Nananom Nsamanfo, Egungun, or Kuvito, or the Akutu, as called in ancient Kemet, they give you the guidance on how to execute what's in your Kra, your soul, your divine consciousness, based on your spiritual anatomy. How do you fulfill that fiery function in creation as a healer, as a restorer of order, but based on your ancestry? You have certain taboos that, because you came through a certain blood circle, and because of what your people went through migrations over the course of thousands of years, you may be a servant of the abosom that governs hot metal and war and fire and so forth, which is called Ogun in the Yoruba tradition, Bena in the Akan tradition, Erubehudet in ancient Kemet, the same divinity, different descriptive titles. And when you look in the languages, you'll find all those other titles in all the other languages as well. So for example, Bena in the Akan tradition is the abosom operating through the planet Bena, they call Mars, the abosom of war, metal, enforcer of divine order, and so forth. But a metal caster in the Akan languages is Gu, which means to cast metal. So the Ogufo are the people folk who cast metal. Bena, the abosom of hot metal, is also Ogufo, one of the Ogu people. So even in the language, if you look deeper in the language, you'll find that Ogu there, describing that deity as a descriptive title, is Ogun in Yoruba, Ogu in Vodun, and, across the board. So if you're a child of that abosom, you have his energy, his fire. You're naturally inclined to restore order where disorder is manifested and eradicate disorder. How do you do so? Based on your spirit, your anatomy, based on your blood circle. Maybe you would use certain plants or certain minerals to affect that function, but if somebody else in another clan tried to use the same plants and minerals, they would get sick because they're allergic to those, because it's a taboo. They're serving the same divinity, but because of the different things they've gone through as a people, the way they approach that divinity is slightly different than another group. The way a Yoruba person would approach Ogun is different than the way an Akan person would approach Ena or Ogun, even though we're approaching the same divinity. So it's very similar, but it's slightly different. Just like in your own family, you may be able to eat, walnuts or something, but then your brother may break out eating walnuts because it's an allergen or a taboo for him. That's just on the lowest level. There are spiritual taboos as well, certain behaviors, certain things that will cause a conflict in your energetic body that in your brother or sister or somebody in a different clan it would not. So the Nsamanfo, the Nananom Nsamanfo, the Ancestresses and Ancestors, can show you how to execute your function, give you that kind of guidance based on your ancestral blood circle. So they give the guidance on how to execute what's in your head, what's in your divine consciousness, and the abosom give you the power to execute what's encoded within your Ori. But they're all focused on what is placed in your Ori. Why? Because it is Inyamewa Inyame, the supreme being that gave you your Ori and encoded within you what you're executing in creation. So everything revolves around the Ori, the Okra, and so forth. Okay. So, let's get to another one of these pseudo-Kemetic doctrines that have nothing to do with ancient Kemet or just culture in general. And again, when we talk about Kemet, it's a country, many different groups. We're part of that culture. So even saying, hey, I practice Kemet, that doesn't even make sense. That's like saying, hey, I practice Nigeria. Hey, I practice Ghana. You're part of a clan. You're part of an ethnic group, and then within that ethnic group, you're part of a Patrick clan or Matric clan, and even within that, you're a child of certain Abosom. You need to know what those are. And you can learn that directly from the Abosom who govern you, as well as your Nanano and Samafa, your Ancestresses and Ancestors. Because we don't understand that structure, because we take our cue from our enemies, the whites and their offspring, we'll just say, well, the energies of creation are universal and everybody has them and we can just all attune to them. And we don't need to know anything about ancestry or clans or anything like that because we can just attune to the deity. And, of course, that's not accurate. You attune to the divinities based on how they have been encoded within you by the Supreme Being through the agency of a clan that you were sent through. You were sent through a specific womb or connected to one of your descendants. When you're an ancestral spirit in the ancestral realm, one of your descendants, male or female, generations later, grows up and gets married and copulates, and they bring your spirit back into the world. You are ushered into a specific incarnation by your ancestresses and ancestors. You have a specific set of taboos, echiwadye, as they're called in Akan culture, associated with your clan, but also associated with the abosom that governs. You are tied to a specific abosom. Imagine a cell in the body, a cell in the heart, or a cell in the liver saying, look, I'm not into organized religion. I'm not into organized, polybodyism. I'm just about the body itself. I'm a body cell. I'm not a heart cell. I'm not a liver cell. I'm not a pancreas cell. I'm just a body cell. I'm not going to put myself in that kind of box. I'm just going to be me, and I'm not going to conform to anything. I'm just going to attune to the great body that I'm a part of. Well, once the cell starts doing that, and it's actually part of the liver. So that's its function, that's its structure, that's the reason it came into being. But it's saying, I'm not a liver cell, I'm just a body cell. Then it becomes cancerous and causes all kinds of disfigurement and disorder in the body. And then it's slated for destruction by the immune system cells because it went crazy. That's what the whites and their offspring want us to do. They want us to say, I'm not part of organized religion. And remember, we did a broadcast, religion and spirituality is identical. It is fake religion that is not identical with spirituality. So our people take the cue from the whites and their offspring. They have these little sayings. I'm not into religion. I'm into spirituality. There's no God out there. The God is inside. Everything you need is inside of you. And we don't worship anything because we are the gods. The black man is God. The black woman is God. All that nonsense. We learn from the whites and their offspring. We repeat it, mimic it, but then we operate based on that. So when we have a natural inclination towards embracing the abosom that governs us and moving in a certain fashion, then the pseudo-spiritualists will come along and say, no, you don't have to do that. You don't have to deal anything with any ancestresses and ancestors or any kind of shrine or any kind of pseudo-ritual practice. All you have to do is just be you and focus on, the abyss and escaping this cycle of reincarnation. That's all you need to do. There's no such thing as morality. Good and evil are two halves of a whole, and you just need to know the balance between the two, and you can't have one without the other. All that kind of nonsensical pseudo-philosophy we incorporate, and we operate based on that and create disorder in our lives. So let us, we're going to take another phone call, and then we're going to get into the pseudo-extraterrestrial nonsense. All right. You had a question, Chiawo? You had a question or a comment?
Well, my question I have to ask, and I didn't really get a chance to ask this last week, but since we already in the close to the midpoint of 2015 for our ancestral Akan calendar, what does the Aboso, the tell you in regards to our people in their situation now looking forward to this cycle? Because we are in 2015. That's the first question. I have another question that I want to ask. Right?
Now you said what are they looking forward to in this upcoming cycle? You saying?
Like at times you are able to communicate like everybody else if they were really in tune to the ancestors, the Aboso, and you get messages to them. You get messages from them whenever chance you get, either daily or etc. So I'm saying, what do they tell you, or what they forecast, or what we're seeing our people going forward this midway cycle of the 2015? Because the count that's passed of the New Year in September 21st, we're almost 2 months of the midway point. That's what I was at. That's my question.
Okay. So, well, to answer that, like now, and when the call is talking about the cycle, like we start, like in our Khan culture, around September, sometimes August, October on the continent. Here in America, the Akwamu nation in North America, Akwamu Mine, Amadukai Tifimu, we have our New Year celebration. Our 7-day New Year celebration is always in September, right? And the first day of the autumn equinox, or Atemet equinox, is the first day of our New Year. And that was the first day of the New Year, September 22nd of 13,015. Of course, we do not calculate days going back to 2015 years when there was no character named Jesus that existed for us at all. We wouldn't base a calendar on a fictional character or character in general. So we're 3 months into the New Year cycle, right? So that's
4 months.
The first piece. 4 months, right? Getting it almost 4 months. So what we're doing is, when you talk about what's coming up, different cycles have a different effect, just like the different seasons of, that the earth goes through. You can tell the different effects that the seasons have upon the earth. When the earth is being heated up, when it's starting to cool down, depending on the region that you're living in, your body is also heating up, also cooling down during these different cycles. That affects your behavior, that affects your temperament, that affects your emotional output, and so forth. But the key is those are influences. The seasons, the movement of the seasons, the stars, as we talked about last week when we talked about the real Zodiac versus the fake Zodiac and so forth. The influences of the constellations, the abosom that operate through the constellations, their effect on the earth, their effect on our bodies. The same thing with the influence of the gravitational pull of the moon. Like the gravitational pull of the moon affects the rising and lowering of the tides on the planet, but also the rising of the water levels in your body, causing you to retain more moisture, and your water levels, quote unquote, rise, or you retain less, and your water levels, diminish to a certain extent. And the less water you have, the less contemplative you are, deep in thought and things like that, the more active and fired up you are, and so forth. All those things are influences on behavior, influences on inclinations, and so forth. However, they are not determinants of behavior. What's determinant is what is coded within your kra, and if you align with it, that's what's determinant. If you align with your kra, then you can determine what direction your life is going to unfold. If you get out of alignment with your kra, and you put yourself on another path, then depending on what path you put yourself on, what wayward path you put yourself on, the Nsamanfo can see what's going to unfold as well. It's very similar to somebody, as we used the example before, somebody's on top of a building in a downtown area, and they can see a number of blocks down. They can see one car speeding towards the intersection going east, and speeding towards the intersection, and another car is, north and speeding south towards the same intersection. The person with the vantage point from above, the bird's eye view, they can see that these cars are going to meet and they're going to crash because they're moving in the same direction at the same pace, and they could inform one of the people in the car, call them on the phone and say, listen, if you don't change lanes or if you don't modify your speed, your velocity, or your direction in your future is going to be a crash, and it's coming up very soon. That's the vantage point that the Nananom and Samanfo have, as well as the Abosom have with respect to us. Us moving in physical, three-dimensional, quote-unquote, time is different than the way our spirits move in creation. Our spirits, as we talked about yesterday, when we talked about Awusi and talking about the Abosom of agility, we're talking about when he affects the, possession or release of a spirit from the physical body. Your spirit becomes more agile, like Awusi. So, of course, in the dream state, you can move to different places instantaneously. You can go to sleep, hit the snooze, 5 minutes later you wake up, and within that 5 minutes you had a number of experiences that you could not have had in the physical world because of the agility, quote-unquote, of your spirit in comparison to physical time. So because we are moving slower, quote-unquote, than the Nsamafo, they can see things unfolding as they're unfolding and warn you about what's happening, and so that you can change direction. If you don't change direction, then what they say is going to unfold does unfold because they can see it unfolding. So that's the way they can, quote-unquote, show you the future. That's one way. That's what's unfolding. So it's the pseudo-future. But then also what is embedded within your cry, your divine function, what was put in your head by the Supreme Being, they can also attune to that and let you know what's unfolding for you if you stay on the right track. So that's the real, quote-unquote, future. So all of that plays into what's unfolding, what's coming up in the next cycle. Yes, there are cycles. Yes, there are seasonal cycles. Yes, there are constellations that are influential, but what's determinate with regard to behavior and the unfolding of your life is your capacity or your decision to align with your cry. You align with your cry, certain things will unfold. If you do not, then other things will unfold. But you can find out from your Nsamanfo when you connect with them on a consistent basis. You can check in with them to see if you're on the right track. So that's key.
All right, and the other question I have to ask is, I was wondering if your own publication, or I'm not sure if you referred this before in recent shows, but did our answers always depict, say, or estimation of how old the Earth is? Because I'm not sure if I remember if you did address that in regards.
I don't remember putting it in a publication. In fact, if I did anything, it may have been like on a forum on the Ning site, possibly. And I'm trying to remember if I ever addressed anything like that. But when they're talking about, for example, you'll see in the Runu Pertinent Heru, they won't give a specific date, but they'll use the Abosom Hehu, often called Hehu, and the female is Hehu, and they'll talk about millions of years, and then they'll use certain, Medutu as determinative, dealing with millions of years of existence. So it's talking about multiple millions of years, but I haven't found a specific date like, the Earth is 6 billion years old.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it may be somewhere in the text where they give a specific date. I haven't necessarily looked for it per se, but they do talk about millions of years dealing with existence.
Okay, the reason I asked that question because these so-called dumb Israelites, or whatever they Bible thumpers want to call it, they always refer to that same stupid book saying the Earth is so 12,000 years old. I say that make no sense. You forgot to say who wrote that book, and then just gave you a number, and you still refer even to this so-called 2015, which is 1315. You still think it's still 12,000 years old after all that, and say the intelligence is just crazy. I mean, that's why I kind of asked, because I say, I don't think no one really has a really exact date to mean all this stupidness, but they're not going to really give you a real legit number. So, that's why I kind of asked that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And we appreciate the call.
And lastly, I'd like to thank Adiro for posting that about the celebrity about him being enslaved by Native Americans. People don't know about that history. It says not just whites. Also, these people they call those Mongoloids, those Native Americans, they enslaved us too. And she kind of posted and revealed it.
Definitely.
Yeah, so thank you for that. All right. Thank you again, the doctor.
Okay. Okay. So, right. So, and of course, people with Hebrew Israelites and others talking about the earth is, 6,000 years old or 12,000 years old. Clearly, that's idiotic. It's good that they're coming out and embarrassing themselves and immortalizing their idiocy on, video, online, publishing things, because back in the day, when people would go out and give speeches, before people had iPhones and they could just pull out an iPhone and record people, and there was no YouTube and all that, people could talk nonsense all day long and get a following, and if somebody challenged them on something, then if they learned something new, they can flip it around and pretend like they were teaching it all along. But now people are immortalizing their idiocy online, so you can say some nonsense, and then people can remember and pull up the evidence and say, well, hey, you said the earth was 12,000 years old, which is idiotic. And these people are promoting that. So it's good that they're exposing that level of stupidity on one hand, and also those who are agents of the whites and their offspring, which these Hebrew teachers and Muslim teachers and 5%ers and other individuals, these who are leading these groups, they know this information is inaccurate. This is why they're putting that information out. Now you have the little followers, many of them who don't know, but the ones who are the teachers, the Moors, and all these other ones, they're deliberately misinforming our people. That's their goal. They've been doing that all along. So, but now they're being exposed on a daily basis, repeatedly. Before we go forward, there are 2.5 minutes left in the broadcast with regard to the online aspect of it. So if you want to listen beyond 11 o'clock, you can call in. You have 2.5 minutes to call in, or else after 11 o'clock, then you won't be able to hear. Only the people on the phone will be able to hear and ask questions and so forth. So the call-in number is 657-383-0635, 657-383-0635, and you have 2 minutes to call in. And for individuals who can't stay beyond, we will be back on tomorrow. We'll send out a notification for that. This broadcast, the archive, including the overtime, will also be available after the broadcast. For those individuals who know about the work that we are doing, all of our books are free online as ebooks, all 15 books, but we do sell the soft cover versions. They range between $8 and $11. You can go to the Nhoma page on our website. Any purchase that you make, of course, supports the work that we are doing, but we are also working to establish a physical space for our center so we can expand our services to the community, including the substance abuse abstinence ritual methods that have been effective for people to overcome substance abuse and addictions and so forth, the domestic violence piece. We also have the behavioral health training for Black behavioral health professionals to include culture when they're dealing with their clients in foster care and mental health agencies and so forth. We also give away free copies of our books. Every time we do a presentation in any city that we've gone to, we give away a free copy of one of our books. Many of our people are now working, don't have income, but they need this information. So in addition to making all of the ebook versions free, we give away free copies of our books. So your support of our publications, not only will you receive a book, one or more books, but it also will assist us to expand our services to the community. And when we have the center, of course, that we're working on, you'll see that on the page. You'll see the GoFundMe campaign, and you'll see that on the publications page as well. We'll be able to expand the classes as well as the employment opportunities in the publishing arm of our organization. We publish all of our books and print them in-house, in color, on our own printers. People will be able to be employed in that fashion as well as through our entrepreneurship piece, which we already have. So all of that you'll find on the website, on the Nhoma page on the website. So we're moving through all these pseudo practices. We mentioned Gnosticism, of course. We touched on hermeticism, which, of course, let's look at a couple of things with hermeticism. The basis of what we've talked about already applies to hermeticism as well, and just knocks that out. So when you look at that Madanechi, Divine Law and Divine Hate, that book we go into detail about what the worldview is based on divine order, and it smashes all of these pseudo doctrines. You look at our book, The Origin of the Term Yoga, Karakasa, The Origin and Nature of the Chakra, where we go into detail showing about, what that really is through the definitions that we summarized today. If you look at, for example, when they're talking about the Hermetica, right? And people talk about the 7 Hermetic principles. Of course, these are not Hermetic principles. Of course, there was no Hermes. Tahuti is the motto from which they took the quote-unquote Hermes fake character from. However, Tahuti, again, is a force in nature and has always been that. It was not a man who was an adept, who was an elevated adept, and later on it was deified. Pure nonsense. That's whites in our offspring trying to take agency away from the divinities so that we will end up worshiping them in their pseudo-philosophy so that we can be under their control. How did they do that? Through creating a fictional character, saying he was just an individual, and then placing pseudo-philosophy that at first sounds proper, but then when you look at it, it's actual pseudo-philosophy. People talk about the 7 Hermetic principles, the principle of polarity. For example, everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has this pair of opposites, all of that. Like and unlike are the same, and all of that. Okay, so you start off the principles dealing with opposites that has nothing to do with Hermetic law and so forth. There's Amen and Amenet, that's the foundational balance in creation, the foundational complementary opposites in creation, the Great Father and the Great Mother, who are conscious living entities that we can communicate with, that Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut people, African people, black people only can communicate with through the agency of our craft. Learn from Amen and Amenet, get direction from them, see them, we can communicate with them. This has always been true across the board, no matter where we are in the world. So that's the foundational complementary opposite relationship. The balance of male and female, not conflictual opposites, but balance. There's no such thing as all truth but half truth. Total nonsense. Truth is truth. Truth is absolute in reality. The whites in our spring don't want to talk about absolute truth because they would like to include falsehoods and try to make that part of the divine order. When they talk about all truth or half truth, good and evil are 2 halves of a whole, totally inaccurate. Male and female are 2 halves of a whole. Expansion and contraction are 2 halves of a whole. Birth and death are 2 halves of a whole, not life and death. So you have some Hermetic people, they'll say, well, life and death are 2 halves. No, birth is an event, death is an event governed by a different abosome. Life is continuous throughout. You live in the physical world, go through the gate of death, live in the spirit realm, go through the gate of birth, live in the physical realm. Birth and death are 2 halves of a whole. When we talk about in the Madanechi, divine law and divine hate, uncreated aspect of the universe, the unformed black substance of space, which is the abode of Ka and Khanit, a male and female divinity. That black substance is unformed, like unformed clay. Then Amen and Amenet direct Ra and Ra'et to move through that black substance and carve out black spheres, which later become black bodies, which becomes the bodies of suns, and so forth, stars. This is the origin of the created universe. The black substance went from an unformed substance to a formed substance, from the uncreated to the created, mediated by the creator and creatress under the direction of Amen and Amenet. So you went from unformed to formed. It's like unformed clay to formed pots, sculpture. Now, if somebody comes and destroys the pots with a hammer and they scatter the pieces all over the floor, that's not the balance of the formed pot. The balance was the unformed clay to the formed clay under the direction of the creator or molder of the pot. That's the balance. That's the complementary opposite. Unformed to formed. Somebody comes and destroys the pot and it breaks up. That's a perversion of the form. It's not the balance of the form. The disordered, broken up pots, that's the evil, the disorder, the perpetuation of disorder. That's not the opposite of the formed pot. It is the perversion of the formed pot. The formed is that which is good. Whatever has been formed by Nyame under their direction, the created universe, that is the same as good. Order and good is the same thing. So the unordered clay was made into an ordered form. It went from non-order to order, unformed to formed, uncreated to created, non-order to order, meaning from non-order to an orderly state, meaning a good state, because good and order is the same word and the same concept. When somebody comes and breaks up the good or breaks up the order has been perverted. Now that's disorder. That's not the balance of the order. The balance of order is not disorder. That's the perversion of the order. The balance of the order is the non-ordered state, the original state. And then it was changed into an ordered state under the direction of the creator and creatress. The whites and their offspring want you to think that the disorder or the evil is the balance of the good or the balance of the order. And therefore you need disorder or evil, and they balance one another out. So that way they introduce evil or criminality or disorder as part of the divine scheme, as part of the principle of polarity and divine opposites, and therefore you can't reject evil or the purveyors of evil, the whites and their offspring, because if you attack them for being evil or disorder, then you don't really understand divine, the continuum of divine balance. So you're out of harmony. You're out of harmony for attacking the disorder. Let's imagine if your immune system cells were about to kill disfigured cancerous cells, the disordered cells, because they become disfigured and disordered. And then the other cells in the body, the cancerous cells said, no, wait a minute, you can't kill us, because if you do that, you don't understand the principle of polarity and balance. You're killing us and we're evil, but you're going against the good, and you don't understand the divine balance of male and female and the polarity, the balance of, opposite. You're going against the divine order if you kill us. You need to let us remain so we can consume and destroy you. But in reality, when the immune system cells marshal their forces to go kill the disfigured cancerous cells, not only do they understand divine order, they are agents of the divine order. That's their function, given to them by the Supreme Being to kill the cancerous cells. So the whites and their offspring, as cancerous cells within the body of black humanity, would like to introduce disorder into the divine scheme to preserve their lives so that we will not exterminate them, and also give them the opportunity to continue to destroy and oppress us with impunity. And our people have embraced this idiocy, thinking it has something to do with the 7 axioms of Tahuti, and they teach that nonsense. And they call themselves master teachers, metaphysicians, spiritualists, dealing with the ancient sciences. They're dealing with nothing. So we're exposing the idiocy of individuals who are misinformed, but specifically those who are deliberately misinforming our people. Because once they get on that level, which is a low level, then they start accepting everything. They talk about the principle of gender. Everything has a male and female in it. Then that allows them, that opens the way for them to embrace bisexuality, homosexuality, and say that's part of the divine order. If you understand the higher principles, everything has gender in it, so you can't discriminate against them, because in reality, they're part of the divine scheme as well, which is totally inaccurate. If you have an immune system and forces in nature, benign, abinah, which are designed to destroy disorder, seek it out, destroy it, and eradicate it for the integrity of the order to be maintained, then when you see disorder manifest, it can't be obviously a part of the divine order, the divine scheme. It is going against divine order. So when people say, well, evil is part of the divine scheme, the Supreme Being introduced evil as part of our culture, and therefore you can't eradicate. If you go to Modern and Chi, divine law and divine hate, we dealt with this in detail in a previous broadcast when we talked about who is Afurakanu, or what does it mean to be Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, African. We'll just touch on this quickly. If you look in one of the texts in ancient Kemet, coffin text number 1130, 1130 in the 12th dynasty, Ra is talking about, they call it the 4 good deeds of the Creator. That's just what the Whites and Offspring label it. But Ra, this is what Ra says in this particular text, Coffin text, 12th dynasty, about 4,000 years ago. I made the 4 winds so that every person, talking about Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut people, might breathe in his or her time and place, talking about order. I made every person like his or her fellow. I did not instruct them to do evil. It was their own hearts that caused them to disobey that which I instructed. So, in our culture, the Creator of the universe says specifically he didn't direct anybody to do evil. That came out of them in disobeying or getting out of harmony with the direction, with the order. Just like disfigured cells, they're not directed by the brain, hey, become disfigured and cancerous and start eating up everything in the body. They don't get that from, the brain. They may be influenced from toxins from the outside or whatever, but they're not getting that from the brain. But when they go in that direction, then the brain directs the immune system cells to go and kill them and expel them from the body. That's the divine order. Because with regard to divine order, it's the divine acceptance, the law of order. This is our culture, the law or love of order, and the rejection or the hatred of this order. Heru Behudet and Sechima, Benna and Apena, Ogun and Iyami Abeni in the Yoruba tradition, the Orisha, they both do the abosom of divine hate. And we look in the book, Modern and Chi, Divine Law, Divine Hate, we trace the etymology of the term hate directly to ancient Kemet. It's not an English term. It's not a Proto-Indo-European term. It is a term in ancient Kemet. It's a term in the Akan language with the same meaning. And it also makes up the name, descriptive titles of Heru Behudet and Sekhmet as the god and goddess of divine hate, literally. These Negroes are not teaching you that when they try to incorporate unconditional love, for example, in the culture of ancient Kemet. They'll say, well, in ancient Kemet, we embrace unconditional love. We don't hate anyone. Hate isn't part of our culture. That's an absolute lie. Hate is one half of divine order. The world is created through law, ma'ah and ma'at, and sustained through hate, Heru Behudet and Sechima. So through law, the expression of order, the divine order is laid out and expressed through law. And it is impressed through hate. It is imprinted through hate. It is stamped through hate, meaning anything outside of that law is stamped out. So the expression of order is divine law, governed by ma'ah and ma'at. The impression of divine order is governed by hate, Heru Behudet and Sechiba. They're gods and goddesses of law, gods and goddesses of hate. That's always been part of our culture. That's one half of divine order. If you don't understand the divinity of hate and the divinities of hate, you have no knowledge whatsoever of cosmology and divine order, period. It is the whites and their offspring who want to teach us, do not hate. Hate is evil, hate is wrong, because they understand that the abosom that govern divine hate are those who empower us and motivate us to exterminate our enemies so that we can preserve order. So they had to put forth that foolish notion that hate is evil and hate is not spiritual. We prove in the book, Modern and Chi, Divine Law and Divine Hate, that one half of divine order is hate. So we go into detail about that. So when they're talking about the principle of, getting back to the principle of gender, then now you can't reject anyone because you think it's unconditional love. You can't reject evil. You can't reject the purveyors of evil. So because of the pseudo understanding of the principle of polarity, thinking that good and evil are two halves of a whole, and just different gradients of the same principle, which is inaccurate, foolish understanding or false understanding of the principle of gender. Now you're incorporating bisexuality, homosexuality, and so forth. You look at our book, Kokoba, Warning, which is bisexuality, homosexuality never existed, was never accepted in ancient Kemet. We go through those various texts that the whites and offspring attempt to use to prove that bisexuality or homosexuality existed in Kemet and was accepted. We prove through those same texts, through proper translations, and through cosmology that supports the real translations, that this sexuality is hated by the Abosan directly. And they declare that on a consistent basis. They declare it in the text of ancient Kemet. They continue to declare that through possession and communication and divination today. So anybody trying to say that the deities accept all people, totally inaccurate. They reject disorder and the purveyors of disorder. They reject non-Afurakani, non-Afuraitkaitnut individuals, non-black people. The only people who can attune to the forces in nature, who are not repelled by the forces in nature, are those who have a krawa, a soul of divine consciousness. That is Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people only, not pseudo-Native Americans, not Hindus, Arabs, whites and their offspring in America, in Europe, Asians, none of that. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people have a different spiritual anatomy. That's key. And we deal with that in our book, Crowd Complex, The Soul of Akamfoa. Of course, all of these books are on our in-home page, on ODWIRA.com. You can download all the ebook versions for free, once again. So we smashed that foolish argument with regard to dissexuality, homosexuality. But what you have is people trying to include that nonsense into ancient Kemet. They'll say, hey, well, it's okay to date interracially. It doesn't matter because, we all need to explore. We're not against homosexuality. That's that person's thing, and we need to understand the principles of gender. When you have a higher understanding, you understand that all things end up leading to the Tao, quote unquote, or find balance anyway. You can use anything to get the balance. You need to use evil to get the good, and you need to use good to get the evil. All of that nonsense, of course the whites and their offspring will teach that to destabilize our people. But then you have Negroes who claim to be spiritually grounded, or metaphysicians, or traditional priests and priestesses, or dealing with Afrocentric theory and worldview, who are repeating the nonsense of the whites and offspring, just basically unwitting agents of our enemy. Some are unwitting, some are witting agents of the enemy. But many of them, they're spouting this nonsense because deep down inside, in reality, psychologically, spiritually, they have self-hatred, think that our culture is inferior, and they think, again, they need to augment our culture with the pseudo-spirituality and pseudo-metaphysics of the whites and their offspring, because they think that will upgrade our culture, because they think our culture is inferior, primitive, and so forth. So they'll say black people started everything and get proud about that. But when it comes to the culture, they'll say, well, that's degenerate. We need to upgrade it. But we can't upgrade it with white culture, so we'll just blacken up white culture and put it forward as ancient Kemetic. And they'll throw anything into ancient Kemet imaginable and just call it, this is the ancient culture. So this is why we're smashing this nonsense today. So you can go through all of those axioms and you'll see how people corrupt them, as well as any of the doctrines you'll find with regard to hermeticism as well. We already talked about moral relativism. We included that, interracial coupling and so forth. Spirits of disorder, the whites and their offspring are spirits of disorder. They are literally disfigured, disordered, cancerous cells within the body. And just like we have immune system cells to eradicate them, we have immune system cells within our community that are naturally inclined to eradicate these cancerous cells. But just like your normal cells don't mate with and incorporate, in fact, they repel cancerous cells, we have the magnets, and the polarities are reversed, and then the same polarities are facing. Just like dissexuality, homosexuality, we say dissexuality because this means not happening. Sexuality is not happening. When you understand that, same polarities facing, then they repel. And that's an immutable law. No matter what anybody says, of course, the whites and their offspring are perverse. They are perverts. They're spirits of disorder. They incarnate that way. It's not just based on their little behavior now. This is their nature. So, of course, they're going to promote disorder, just like cancerous cells. But this sexuality is repulsive in reality. You can't engage that practice without being engaged in disorder, engaged in unnatural behavior. It's not a choice. It's perverse. Yes, people are influenced by discarnate ancestral spirits. You can remove them and overcome those perverse desires instantaneously. Conditionings that are forced on you by the whites and their offspring, you can overcome those as well. But, especially when people were molested and all that kind of nonsense. Of course, you have some people in our community who lost their own crowd and they're so perverse they become like the whites and their offspring, and they're just as criminal and deserve the same fate as those criminals as well. You always have a few of those in the community. But just like the two magnets repel one another, that's an immutable law. The same is true with Afuraitkaitnut people and all other non-Afuraitkaitnut people. Pseudo-Native Americans, white Hispanics, Latinos, Latinas, white Arabs, white Hindus, white Asians, white Americans, white Europeans, all non-Afuraitkaitnut people are repulsive to Afuraitkaitnut people by nature. They are spirits of disorder without a crowd. The energy that emanates from them is discordant. And when they get near us, whether it's physical or spiritually emanating their discordant vibrations, they are just as repulsive as when that magnet is repulsed by the other one across the table. The only way you can get near them and try to embrace them is if you reject reality and try to impose disorder. The only way you can force those two magnets together is if you force them together and hold them together. But as soon as you let them go, they jump apart. That's the same thing with dissexuality, but it's the same thing with regard to the whites and their offspring, non-Afuraitkaitnut people. So interracial coupling is cosmologically repulsive, and there is no exception to that reality. Give me 1 second. Please plug in. Plug in the battery real quick. And then finally, of course, and that, of course, that takes care of the whole notion of universalism or multiculturalism. Universalism is no such reality. We are different than all other people in the world. The whites and their offspring are a degeneration in original black population. Just like the cells in your body become degenerate, certain cancer cells, they no longer look like the other cells. They're disfigured. They no longer function as the other cells. They seek to consume and destroy. So there's no universalism. The sun shines on everybody, yes, but we can receive that sunlight and transform it, and it warms and strengthens us. The whites and their offspring can develop skin cancer from the same sunlight when both of us are standing there. That's on a physical level. But spiritually, you can stand under the sun, and you can get sunlight, but the abosom that animates the sun can during ritual, possess us. That abosom would never possess the whites and their offspring. So there's no universalism here. There's no multiculturalism either, unless you're talking about multiculturalism amongst various Afuraitkaitnut ethnic groups. Then we can engage in multicultural exchange because we're all the same family wherever we are in the world. Anytime we're studying one Afuraitkaitnut culture, we're also enriching our understanding of our own. Whether if you're studying our Khan culture and you read up on the Yoruba tradition or learn something about the Orisha, you're at the same time enriching your own knowledge of the abosom because they're dealing with the same forces in nature. It's like the Yoruba call the sun Orun, they call the earth mother Onile, they call the oceans, Okun and so forth. Well, in our Khan tradition, the sun is the Oriya, earth is Asase, the oceans are Opo. We're talking about the same entities. We have different names for them. We're talking about the same ones. The way we approach them are slightly different ritually based on our ancestry and what we've gone through over thousands of years, our migrations, our food choices, the kind of taboos we've developed and so forth. So we have a slightly different way of aligning with them, a slightly different way of singing our songs, doing our dances, the way we wear our clothes and so forth. But fundamentally it's the same. It's just slightly different based on certain nuances. But we have to honor those nuances just like you have to honor your allergens, or else you can't say, well, I'm similar to my brother and he can eat walnuts, so can I, because we came from the same mother, but you blow up and have to go to the hospital. or to a natural healer, and he doesn't. You have to honor those differences. So there are differences there. So, but we're still the same family, Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut people. So there's multiculturalism amongst us, but outside of that, not at all. And we mentioned here the description of the episode. We mentioned New Age pseudo-spirituality, but that we've already included that in everything we've said, because all of this is really what they're promoting is New Age, pseudo-New Age spirituality, unconditional love and all of that, more relativism and pseudo-principles of polarity and gender and everything else. We mentioned kabbalism. We kind of touched on that with regard to Gnosticism and other pseudo-esoteric forms of thought, Sufism, but when you look at those, the sephiroth of the so-called tree of life and their values associated with those 10 or sometimes 11 if they're talking about dots and everything, they don't have an understanding. Their values are incorrect, and the bosom that they claim that govern these different divinities are incorrect, and what they are invoking, talking about Gabriel and Samael and all these different spirits, they're just invoking the deceased, drunkard, criminal relatives of the whites and their offspring. That's it. They're not dealing with actual abosom. They don't know. There are different sets of abosom. There are the 42 abosom who are ancestors of Ma'at, the 8 abosom of Kemenu, which they call the EGUA, the 9 abosom of Anu, the 4 children of Heru. All these different groupings of abosom have their own function, just like you have different organs and organ systems in your body with their own sets of organs or sets of glands, like the respiratory system or the nervous system or the diffuse neuroendocrine system or the circulatory system. They have their own sets of organs with their own functions. Every grouping of divinities is like an organ system within the great divine body, and they all have their role. So a little set of 10 does not govern everything, and the ones that they even have and the values they associate with them are inaccurate. They're not invoking anything. They're not communicating with anything except deceased relatives of the whites and their offspring, as well as criminal deceased of their own relatives and non-relatives, black ones who were engaged in nonsense, who were like Muslims and Moors and, following the whites and their offspring in a previous lifetime, traitors, and now these same wayward spirits are trying to influence you to continue to practice Islam or continue to practice criminality, continue to be a rapist, continue to be a child molester. They try to, enforce that kind of nonsense on you. So that's what's going down with that. And then finally, of course, this notion of extraterrestrials having something to do with ancient culture, ancient Kemet, ancestral culture, 100% false. There are no aliens in tin cans flying around the earth and hiding out. Been hiding around for years, and they're really the deities and all of that. The only people who can fall for that kind of idiocy are black people who still worship the whites and their offspring. If you think about Desert Storm going back to the 90s. Now, they were on television they're very proudly showing what the stealth bomber was doing in Iraq. They would give briefings showing, they went to this area and the stealth bomber would drop bombs and destroy, these different, targets, these military targets that they were hitting, and they were showing everything that they were doing. And that's just a good example because when the stealth bomber first came out and they were showing it, everybody was excited. Fools were excited about it. When you look at the stealth bomber, it's a different kind of plane. It can go, it can hover, it doesn't make hardly any sound. The way it's shaped, it looks like the kind of fish called a manta ray or a stingray that you see in certain areas, a specific kind of marine life. You look up manta ray or stingray, you look at the body of that, and you look at a stealth bomber, it looks like that. So it looks like that kind of fish. It moves very slow. It hovers for long periods of time. It doesn't make a sound. But they were proudly showing that and what it was doing. If they didn't show you that, you would never seen a plane that looked like that before, move like that before, could hover like that before, and not make a sound, and so forth. If that came and hovered, only thing you ever seen that would hover over your house is the helicopter. It's very loud. You know what it looks like. You're used to seeing helicopters. especially in our neighborhoods, we're used to seeing that, depending on where you're at. So to see something move very slowly and hover over your house, not making a sound, and it looks like in the shape, it looks like a triangle, and it looks like an entity, somebody could tell you, well, that was an extraterrestrial, that was a UFO, or some fools would say an IFO. And you would have no knowledge of anything beyond what they're saying. The whites and their offspring make all kinds of aircraft that they don't promote, so that then when they fly one of the little planes out and give you a little blurry picture, then the only thing you could possibly think is, well, it must be a UFO. We're so conditioned that we don't think, oh, that just must be one of their planes. The only thing we can think is it must be an alien from another planet. That's how brainwashed our people are. So on one hand, whenever you see an actual physical contraption that's flying around, and most often they don't send the little military planes out. They just show little blurry pictures and blips and all kinds of nonsense. So they'll show little blurry blotches that look like soap bubbles on a shower wall, and they'll tell you that's a picture of pyramids on Mars, and fools will start saying the pyramids were on Mars, and that's where we were. So, but most of the time they don't send out planes. They just show little blurry pictures like that, and our people fall for that. Every now and then they'll send out a little plane, no different than a stealth bomber, or or just a fighter jet or something like that with a different form, and our people just go crazy with it, and they can float that around. But beyond the physical contraptions, there are no aliens who are reptilians flying around who came to enslave the people and make them workers and the Anunnaki and all that nonsense. The whites and their offspring want to corrupt the traditions, make you degenerate your own culture, denigrate your own culture, to make you believe that you were stupid all along. You were actually worshiping aliens all along, and they were making you slaves, and you're supposed to overcome that, and they weren't real deities, and all. Always trying to put forth the notion that they have the real answers. They knew all along, and it was the foolish Africans, the primitive, ignorant Africans who couldn't understand reality. So therefore, we just start following little reptiles that were flying around in ships. So we were following little spirits that we didn't understand. They're up under the earth. All of that is 100% nonsense. You have frauds, fakes, criminals like Credo Mutwa teaching absolute nonsense. No basis in reality, no truth in it, promoting homosexuality, bisexuality, promoting interracial coupling, getting paid by the whites and their offspring to teach nonsense that is really not in Zulu culture or any of these other cultures, as he lies and says it is. And people will actually use this fool as a reference. When he talks about one of his great friends is Zachariah Sitchin, of course, he's studying all that nonsense that Zachariah Sitchin puts out, and then he incorporates that, gives Zulu names to it, and then, says it's real. And our people don't know any better because some of us deep down inside are still enamored with our enemies. You have individuals reading nonsense like Black Roots, quote-unquote science, or Black Roots wisdom, throwing little words around about initiation, throwing little words around about ancient African society. But when you go further into that nonsensical text, all it is a rehashing of the idiocy of the Nation of Islam. So you'll see Yahweh and you see Yaqub and the 144,000 and all that stupidity. All they're doing is recognizing that, number one, black people started falling away from Islam and Christianity and Hebrewism and all these little silly cults. Nation of Gods and Earths and Moors, they've been around for years. The Moors been around for 100 years. The Nation of Islam, almost 100 years. The Moorish Hebrews, 100 years. And our people, not only for over 100 years, really never, coalesced around these foolish doctrines for the most part. But today, something has happened that has never happened before. People are actually scrutinizing these doctrines. In the past, they would just dismiss them. Noah's been around for 100 years. People didn't care. But now that YouTube has become popular and they have a new outlet, now they can present this information as though it's new and fresh and get some adherence. But at the same time, commensurate with that, is the level of scrutiny they never had before. And now people are not just dismissing them. Now people are exposing them and clowning them and ridiculing them for the idiocy that they've been holding on to for the past 100 years, which is good because they need to be exposed and ridiculed and dismissed, just fully, totally. So what they're doing now is trying to grab their idiocy onto traditional ancestral religion. Either they'll try to pollute the philosophy of ancestral religion and say that we were embracing homosexuality or embracing all these other foolish concepts, and therefore black people shouldn't embrace them. Or if they can't get away with that because that's been exposed as misinformation, then they try to graft on their pseudo-philosophies onto ancestral culture. So they'll try to grab Islam and make that the original culture of ancient Kemet. Or they'll say, well, the original people of Kemet were really practicing an ancient Christianity that other people didn't have, where they were practicing the Kabbalah really comes, and monotheism and all of that really comes up out of ancient Kemet. Totally inaccurate. These are parasites, agents of the whites and their offspring trying to live upon a host. And the host is Afuraitkaitnut. They're trying to get their last bit of life, blood by sucking the blood of ancient Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut cosmology to give them life. Just like the whites and their offspring have done with their pseudo-spirituality, pseudo-New Age spirituality, pseudo-esoteric schools. They're always going back to the ancient Egyptians or, even trying to deal with Atlanteans and Lemurians, all of these lost landism concepts, which none of these lost lands existed. They're all manufactured as a political ploy to get our people away from our culture and try to transfer the foundation of culture, civilization, philosophy, and science from our people to a mythical white people who never existed. Then our people jump on that foolish doctrine, blacken up the mythical people, and say that was us, whether it was Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, or, coming from the stars, which is totally inaccurate. Real people who practice real religion, we know that All-Star and All-Set and Heru did not come from Orion or come from the star system Sirius. We know that these are boson because we actually invoke them. We have our own cry, own divinity in our head region, but we communicate with All-Star, All-Set, Heru, as our Wusi and Etsi and Yao in the Akan tradition, or Obatala and Oduduwa and Shango in the Yoruba tradition, or Dangbe and Minona and Hevioso in the Vodun tradition. We know who these Orisha Vodu Abosom are. We have a direct relationship, so you can't be fooled when you know who they are. But when Negroes really are not dealing with them, and they're dealing with either nothing at all or with wayward, discarnate, criminal-type deceased relatives, then you have so-called high priests, high priestesses, queen mothers, kings, quote-unquote, in Kemetic organizations, and they'll either outwardly say, well, actually, the deities came from another star system, or they'll take you into the quote-unquote inner chamber, the inner sanctum, and say, well, the ancient mysteries really are that the deities are really extraterrestrials, but we can't share that information with the, layperson because they won't understand. They'll try to take you into some arcanum which really doesn't exist because they don't know what they're talking about. So, the deities are not extraterrestrials. The Abosom are the spirits that animate the sun, just like your spirit animates your body. The spirit of a lion animates a lion. The spirit of a hawk animates a hawk. The spirit that animates the oceans, animates the rivers, animates Asase for the earth mother, animates the sun, moon, black substance of space, and so forth. These are the children of Nyame wa Nyame, Amenet Amen. These are the actual divinity, real divinities that we can communicate and verify. The whites and their offspring cannot. So we need to stop listening, number one, to our absolute enemies, the whites and their offspring, whether they're European or Asian, including so-called Native American, they're all Eurasians. But we also need to stop listening to these pseudo-Kemetics who introduce white pseudo-philosophy, blacken it up, and put it forward as quote-unquote Kemetic doctrine. Culture of ancient Khanat or Nubia and Kamit continue, and it manifests and is expressed through the Akan people, the Bambara people, the Basa people, the Fula people who are still traditional, those who are still traditional, the Yoruba, the Ebe, the Fon, the Kosa, all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people, wherever we are in the world. Even when we were forced to migrate into the Western Hemisphere during the Musu Alkesi, the enslavement period, those who maintained the traditions are those who freed themselves from enslavement and established independent nations, Maroon nations in Jamaica, Maroon nations in South America like Suriname and the Quilombos in Brazil, Maroon-type nations in North America, like in Dismal Swamp and other areas where we established our own towns after waging war against the whites and their offspring. When we continue to practice Vodun in Haiti, Rukumi minus the whites' perversion in Cuba, or Candomblé in South America and Brazil, or Winti, the Akan tradition in Suriname, or Hoodoo in North America, in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi and so forth, Juju in North America, Voodoo in North America, the Gullah Geechee tradition in North America. We continue to practice our tradition. These are expressions of the culture of ancient Kemet. And when you look, we're worshiping the same divinities, communicating with the same ancestresses and ancestors in Hoodoo in North America, in Juju in North America, in Voodoo in New Orleans and other parts of North America, minus the white influences, as well as the Caribbean, South America, Europe, the Western Hemisphere, wherever we are. We're practicing the same culture that we carried in our blood circles from the continent. And that same culture that we carry from the continent is the same ancient culture going back tens of thousands of years. The same sun, the same moon, the same black substance of space, the same earth, the same oceans and rivers and atmosphere and thunder and lightning that we experienced thousands of years ago, these same entities impact us physically today. The same spirits that animate the sun, moon, stars, black substance of space, earth, atmosphere, and so forth are the same spirits that animate those entities today, and we still are connected to them. So we have real culture. So whenever you hear monotheism, atheism, pseudo-metaphysics, exoteric and esoteric forms of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hebrewism, Christ consciousness, Gnosticism, hermeticism, Sufism, Kabbalism, Vedanta, Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, pseudo-Native American spirituality, which is just them communicating with their deceased criminal relatives, imitating our people, just like white people trying to invade the Yoruba tradition. They take on Yoruba names. They engage in Yoruba motions, going through the motions, learn some of the Yoruba language, try to dance around like Yoruba people, but not one Orisha ever communicated with them, ever possessed them, and never will. But just like they do that today, and you can look online and look at the Yoruba tradition, you see a bunch of white people with quote-unquote ilays. They did the exact same thing in Kemet. When the white Greeks and Romans invaded, they began to dress like us, build temples like us, call the names of the deities like us, trying to do everything as we did, but then they began to whiten up the sculptures of the deities and so forth. Of course, the deities never communicated with them. But that process also took place in the Western Hemisphere when some of these white Eurasians, after invading our cultures, so-called Native Americans, but they're actually white migrants from Asia, invaders from Asia, who invaded this hemisphere while we were already here, they began to imitate what our people were doing. Just like the white Greeks and Romans began to dress like the people of ancient Kemet, just like these crackers are trying to dress like Yoruba people and call themselves by Yoruba names today and going back and forth to Nigeria, these white Asians began to imitate our people in the Western Hemisphere prior to the white Europeans, because they're all Eurasians. The Eastern Eurasian is the Asian, the Western Eurasian is the European. They have the same Y chromosome haplogroup. They're the same people, physically and spiritually. They began to imitate our people, so this is why you see teepees and you see certain, practices and feathers and dances and everything else. It's no different than a cracker going to a Yoruba Bembe and trying to imitate everything we do. But they're not dealing with any forces in nature, because the forces in nature do not deal with these white Asians. They don't get possessed by them. They do not communicate with them. All they communicate with is their discarnate, wayward, criminal, deceased relative and some non-relatives, and pass those communications off as the communications with the great spirit of the great, Thunderbird or Mother Sky and all this other nonsense. But they're not communicating with anything. Any different than a Greek saying, I'm communicating with Aset and I'm calling her Isis now. Aset was never communicating with any Greek, no matter how many temples of Isis they erected all over Europe and in Kamit. Aset had nothing to do with them. And the real Abosom have nothing to do with these pseudo-Native Americans. So they are not our brothers and sisters. They are not us and we are not them at all. So when you hear about that, hear about unconditional love, interracial coupling, multiculturalism, universalism, accepting of bisexuality, homosexuality, moral relativism, good and evil, two halves of a whole, and the balance, and extraterrestrialism, and we are the gods, and there's no such thing as a God outside of you, there's a God inside of you, and we are the deities, and we are the masters, and the forces of nature are supposed to bow down to us. All of that idiocy is a reflection of the whites and their offspring. And surely you have heard many individuals, some who are criminal types, trying to, take people's money, but then you also have individuals who are claiming to be elders, claim to be eldresses, giving presentations around the country, around the world. PhDs, priests, priestesses, queen mothers, kings, linguists, Afrocentric theorists, teachers, professors, they're all teaching misinformation. And it's very easily disputed, very easily exposed, very easily debunked. So as you go through this broadcast, look at the various books we have on our, on our page, go through that information as well as the references. You can very easily see what our real culture is and the origin and the roots of this nonsense. We talked about the psychological reason why they move in that direction, because deep down inside they still believe that our culture is inferior, the white culture is superior. They don't want to admit that openly, so they blacken up white culture to make themselves feel better about presenting white culture to black people in the form of quote-unquote African-centered or Afrocentric spirituality. But the deep down psychological scar is that they still have a great sense of self-hatred and they're still enamored with the whites and their offspring. So that's the root. But then when you look at the actual doctrine, in comparison to real cosmology from our culture, it's easily debunked. So all of this nonsense, all of this pseudo-Kemeticism, we crush that today very easily. Okay, so there's a few minutes left before the broadcast will cut off. Individuals on the phone line, we have a couple of calls. We try to get them in before the broadcast cuts off. Again, for those who came in a little bit later, please support our efforts through the purchase of our soft cover publications. We're trying to establish an institution where we will be able to expand our services, classes, employment opportunities for our people in this region, as well as when we live stream classes and so forth. People will be able to participate as well as being distributors of our work, so you can generate income for yourself. And anybody who wants to be a distributor, just check out the website. You can order the books wholesale and sell them retail. You can do that immediately. So, Yeda said we appreciate your support. We got a couple of calls we're going to try to get in before we cut off. All right. Okay, Michiawo, number 42455. You had a question or a comment?
Yes. You kind of touched on it. I was going to ask you about the tree of life. You kind of touched on it a little bit. So there was no tree of life, and if it was, where did they get it from?
Okay, so what it was is when you look at the different groupings of the deities, like, for example, what they call the Pauten Toru, or for example, the ones in Anu, which they call Heliopolis, with a group of divinities they often call the Ennead, or the 9 deities, which is Atem, Shu, Tefnut, Yeb, Nut, Asar, Aset, Set, and Nebuchadnezzar, that group of 9 divinities. in Greek they would say that's the Ennead, meaning that nine grouping of divinities, and they sometimes operate as judges for people. That grouping of 9 divinities with their different functions, this is where they get that arrangement of a grouping of 9 divinities plus number 10 being, the 10 sephiroth of the tree of life. This is where they get that notion from. But they misapply, first of all, it's not in that arrangement, even though you'll find a little picture arrangement in, the Akkadian civilization and so forth. But first of all, the different spirits that they associate with those 10 spheres are inaccurate. And secondly, there are more than, of course, 10 divinities. There are more than one grouping of 10 divinities. There are groupings of 42 and 8 and 9 and 4, different groupings that all have their own functions, 7, 8, different ones. So that's key as well. And then on top of all of that, the whites and the offspring can't communicate with the divinities anyway. So what they're doing is trying to downsize the number of forces in nature, make us focus on 10, but then even gut them and make us focus on principles, but then even gut the principles and make us focus on principles that are not in harmony with reality and promote that as a system, an esoteric system.
Okay, then. Thank you.
Okay, Medase.
All right, hold that.
Okay, so we only have it's only a few more minutes left. We went into overtime, so, Blog Talk Radio will cut it off without notice any minute. So we're going to end the broadcast here. Yet I'll say we thank you for tuning in. We will be back on tomorrow for EGUA Marketplace. We'll send out a notification to see who's going to be on the show, to confirm that, who's going to talk about their business or service or product. So we'll be sending out that. If you're not part of on our Facebook group, Afuraitkaitnut on Facebook. We are ODWIRA on Twitter. We are Afuraka on Instagram. We also have our network, Afuraka-Afuraitkaitnut.ning.com. You can join that social network. It's private, that we pay for outside of Facebook. You can join, create a profile, and look at blogs and discussions and videos and so forth dealing with this kind of information. And again, we thank you, Yerase, for tuning in. Please support our publications, and we will connect with you tomorrow. Yebeshia Bio, we will meet again. That's it.